Welcome back to Terrified Tales, where the rain falls slow and the fear creeps in quicker. Like and subscribe before we begin, and tell us where and when you're listening. Midnight, alone, that's when they find you. Cora Blythe arrived at the Hollow Estate in the early hours of an autumn morning, when the sun was just beginning to cast long shadows through the mist. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a heaviness that pressed down on her chest with every breath. She had not planned on coming back here, not after all these years. But something had called her back. A whisper, a memory, the faintest hint of Elise's voice. Cora had left her life behind, her work as a sound archivist, the few friends who remained after her sister's disappearance, the memories of her own fragile existence. She had buried herself in the work, transcribing the voices of the dead, cataloguing the sounds of places long forgotten. She'd even hoped to drown out her own memories. But after all this time, the one thing that had never stopped tormenting her was the memory of Elise, the voice that would sometimes echo in her dreams, the faint chime that had marked her sister's final night, the night she vanished from the estate without a trace. No body, no explanation, only the chilling absence, and that sound, the chime. It was strange to be back in the village, the place she had once visited as a child, surrounded by quiet streets and empty houses. Cora hadn't seen anyone here in years, except for the old caretaker who had given her a brief nod upon her arrival. The house, though, the Hollow Estate, was still standing, though barely. It sat at the edge of the village, a towering ruin, its windows dark, the overgrown gardens swallowed by fog. Yet as Cora stared at it from the edge of the village square, she could feel the pull of it, as though the house itself was calling to her. It had been 10 years since that fateful summer, when Elise had gone missing, and Cora had sworn she would never return. But now, the pull was irresistible. She had to know what had happened. She had to find Elise, even if it meant confronting the same suffocating silence she had left behind. As she drove down the long, winding road that led to the estate, memories crept up, unbidden. The scent of the earth, the way the fog hung low, in the trees, the quiet stillness that enveloped everything. It was the same as she remembered. The house had a life of its own, a pulse that she had always felt even when she was a child. It wasn't just the weight of the past that haunted her. It was the house itself, the land, the memory of something unfinished. She parked her car in front of the large wrought iron gate that led into the estate, its rusted hinges barely holding on. The gate creaked in the wind as she pushed it open. She felt an odd mixture of dread and relief. This was where her life had changed. This was where Elise had disappeared. And yet here she was, standing at its threshold once more. Cora stood in the overgrown yard for a moment, looking up at the imposing structure. The Hollow Estate loomed before her, dark and intimidating, its windows like hollow eyes watching her every move. The house had always been too grand for its purpose, too large, too proud for a family of their size. But it had been her family's house, and Cora had grown up in its shadow. Now, it felt like a mausoleum. She didn't even know what she was expecting to find here. Would the house tell her the truth? Would the chime ring once more, a reminder of her lost sister? The air was cool against her skin, but there was an odd sense of warmth that radiated from the house. It felt familiar, like the scent of an old memory, a sound that she had once heard but couldn't quite place. That's when she heard it, the chime, faint, distant, but unmistakable. It was a sound she had heard so many times in her youth, echoing in the halls of the mansion on quiet nights when her sister would sit near the window, humming softly. It was the sound that had haunted her for years, the sound she had never truly understood. Cora froze. The chime. It couldn't be. No one had been here in years. The house had been empty. She hadn't heard it since that night. The night Elise had vanished. The sound grew louder for a moment, as if it was drawing closer, and then faded just as quickly as it had begun. Cora looked around, her heart racing, her breath quickening. She stood alone in the yard, the fog thickening. Around her, the estate towering above her like a sentinel, its dark windows reflecting nothing but the grey sky. The chime had to be in her mind, she told herself. It was a trick, a memory. But the chill that ran down her spine told her otherwise. Something was waiting for her inside. She walked toward the front door, her steps slow and deliberate, as if the house itself were holding its breath. The door was heavy, old wood, creaking in protest as she pushed it open. The smell hit her immediately, a damp, musty odor that was so familiar it almost felt like home. Her hand gripped the door frame as she stepped inside, and she closed the door behind her with a soft click. She was back. The air inside the house was thick, weighed down with the heavy presence of time. Dust motes danced in the weak light that filtered in through the broken windows. The place had been abandoned for so long, yet it felt as though it were only sleeping. The walls seemed to pulse with an eerie energy, as though the house was alive and waiting for her. It was a feeling she couldn't shake, a sensation that crept up her spine and settled in the pit of her stomach. Something was here, something that had been here for a long time. She made her way through the entry hall, her footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. The house seemed to stretch out before her, endless and uninviting. The furniture was draped in sheets, cobwebs hanging from the ceiling. Everything was as it had been when they left, frozen in time. Yet there was an unsettling quality to the place, as though the house had been waiting for her return, and it was not pleased to see her. Cora couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching her, that the very walls were listening. She had always felt that way as a child, but now it was worse. Now it felt like the house was alive, waiting for something to happen. She paused in front of the staircase, staring up at the darkened hallway above. She could hear the faintest sound, a soft creaking of the floorboards as if someone or something was moving in the upper levels. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, but she pushed the fear aside. It was just the house settling. She had to focus on finding answers. She couldn't let the fear take over again. As she ascended the stairs, the chime rang out once more, louder this time. It echoed through the halls, a ringing sound that was both distant and close, as though it were reverberating off the walls of her mind. The sound seemed to wrap itself around her, pulling her deeper into the house, into the memories of the past. Her heart raced, and she felt a wave of nausea rise in her throat. But she had to know. She had to find out the truth. She reached the landing and turned down the hallway, her footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust. The door to the library was ajar, and she could see the faintest sliver of light flickering inside. She stepped closer, her breath coming in shallow gasps, and pushed the door open. The library was as she remembered, dark wooden shelves lined with dusty books, a heavy silence that pressed down on her. And there, in the center of the room, sat an old chair. It was the same chair her mother had always sat in, her favorite chair, the one she had spent hours in reading. Cora had always found it odd how her mother never moved from it, never sat anywhere else. Her mother had seemed so drawn to that chair, as if it held something important. Cora approached the chair, slowly, her mind racing with questions. She ran her hand over the armrest, feeling the worn fabric beneath her fingers. And then, from somewhere deep within the walls of the house, the chime rang again. This time it was clearer, more distinct. A bell, like the one her mother used, to wear on her necklace. The one that had always been too quiet to hear properly. Elise's voice rang out in her mind, faint but unmistakable. "Elise," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Where are you?" She closed her eyes and reached for the chair, sitting down slowly, letting the silence engulf her. The chime continued to ring in the background, like an unspoken answer to her question. Something was waiting, something that had been waiting for a long time. And she knew deep down that the house had never let go of what had happened here all those years ago. The question was, would she? The air around her seemed to grow colder as the chime echoed through the estate, a sound that would not let her escape. The soft, muffled sound of Cora's footsteps echoed through the hollow halls of the hollow estate. The air was thick with a feeling of displacement, like she was walking in the footsteps of a past that refused to die. The faint sound of the chime lingered in the air, barely perceptible, almost like a warning. She stood motionless for a moment in the center of the entryway, taking in the dimly lit room. The windows were mostly covered in grime, the glass cracked in places. Dust clung to the old furniture that had been abandoned long ago. Yet the space felt alive, not with people, but with the memories of them. In the dim light, Cora made out the grand staircase ahead of her, the old wooden steps winding upwards into shadow. But she didn't need to go up just yet. Instead, she turned her focus toward the next room, where she knew she'd find Olivia Kane, the current owner of the estate, whom she had spoken to on the phone earlier. Olivia had been the one who invited her back, though it wasn't clear whether the invitation was born out of genuine hospitality or something more unsettling. Olivia's role as the caretaker of the estate was one Cora didn't fully understand. The woman was a mystery to her, as elusive and obscure as the very house she inhabited. She had little known history in the town, except for the fact that she had appeared years after Cora's family had left the estate. Cora had never met her in person before, only hearing odd rumors whispered among the few remaining townsfolk. But there was no denying the pull she felt to meet her now. A strange, invisible thread seemed to connect Olivia to the estate in a way that made Cora uneasy, though she couldn't yet place why. As she moved down the hallway, the house seemed to close in on her, the air growing colder with each step. A chill ran down her spine when she finally came to the door of the study. She pushed it open without a second thought. The study was large, expansive, and richly decorated with old leather-bound books and shelves filled with artifacts that seemed to be pulled from forgotten histories. There was a large fireplace at one end of the room, the hearth cold and abandoned. The smell of dust and ancient wood filled the air, mixed with something else, something faintly floral, like roses gone past their prime. It was then that she saw her, standing near the window, her back turned. Olivia Kane was a woman who seemed as though she belonged to the house, as though she had grown from the very stone it was built from. Her hair was dark and tangled in loose waves, and she wore a long, flowing dress of deep green, which seemed to shimmer slightly in the dim light, as though woven from shadows. There was a strange grace about her, something that made it difficult for Cora to look directly at her for too long. "Ah, Cora Blythe," Olivia said without turning around. Her voice was calm and composed, but it held a strange, distant quality, as if she was addressing someone she had known for a lifetime. "I thought you might come." "How did you—" Cora began, but her words faltered as Olivia finally turned to face her. "I knew you would come back," Olivia replied with a slight smile, her eyes piercing and unsettling. "The house, it calls to those it has touched. You can't resist it, can you?" Cora swallowed, trying to make sense of Olivia's words. The way she spoke as though the house itself was a living entity, one that controlled not only its own inhabitants, but also those who dared to come too close. Cora hesitated. The words caught in her throat. "I had to come back. For Elise." Olivia's smile faded slightly, and she walked toward the center of the room. as if moving through an unseen veil that separated her from Cora. Her movements were fluid, almost hypnotic. "Elise," Olivia echoed, her tone oddly tender. "Such a tragic story, such a lost soul. This house, it remembers her, you know. It keeps all the memories, those that have been left behind." Cora clenched her jaw, unwilling to reveal the full extent of the questions burning inside her. Olivia's words were too cryptic, too charged with something that felt just out of reach. "You think you've come here to solve a mystery, but you don't realize that the mystery is already inside you," Olivia continued, her voice dropping lower now, as if the words were meant for Cora alone. "You are looking for answers, but in this house answers don't come the way you expect." Cora felt a shiver run through her. There was something unsettling about Olivia's gaze, something predatory. It was as though she could see past the surface, past the walls Cora had carefully constructed around her grief, straight into the hidden recesses of her mind. It was almost too intimate, too invasive. "Why do you live here?" Cora asked, her voice hoarse, as though she were barely able to keep herself together. She couldn't ignore the question any longer, the one that had been on her mind since Olivia had first appeared on the phone. "This place, it's abandoned. The town hasn't been the same since my family left. And yet you remain here, in a place so full of pain and loss." Olivia paused for a moment, and when she spoke again, it was with a measured, almost melancholy tone. "I stay because I'm bound to it. This house is my home. In its silence, I find my purpose. In its shadows, I'm never alone." The way she said it made Cora's heart race. There was something about Olivia that was not just attached to the estate. It was as if she were entwined with it, like a shadow that had been cast across the house for eternity. Cora's breath caught in her throat as the unsettling implications of Olivia's words began to settle into her mind. She wasn't just the caretaker. She was part of the estate, part of its history. Olivia smiled again, her eyes glinting with a knowing look. "You'll see soon enough. The house doesn't just remember the past, it replays it, over and over. The chime that you hear, it's not just a memory, it's a key." Cora frowned, confusion mounting. "A key? A key to what?" Olivia stepped closer, her eyes never leaving Cora's. "A key to what you've been searching for. A key to understanding what really happened to your sister." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning, and for a moment, Cora could feel the floor beneath. Her feet shift as though the house itself was breathing. She could hear the faint echo of the chime again, distant, but growing stronger with each passing second. It was like a drumbeat, calling her forward. Olivia seemed to sense her hesitation, her confusion, and stepped back toward the window. "I cannot give you the answers, Cora. You must find them yourself. But I will be here if you need help. I will always be here." Cora stared at her, her mind racing. There was something about Olivia that felt both comforting and terrifying. She wanted to leave, but she knew she couldn't. The house had already pulled her in. It always had. As Cora turned toward the door, ready to leave the study and explore further, she heard it again. So faint it almost seemed like a trick of her mind at first. The chime. This time, it was louder, clearer, and seemed to come from somewhere deep within the house. Cora turned back to Olivia. "Where is it coming from?" she asked, her voice tight with the sudden pressure of anxiety. Olivia didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slowly turned from the window, her gaze intense. "The house will show you what you need to see," she said quietly, her voice carrying a strange weight to it. "But be careful, Cora. Not all things that are revealed are meant to be understood." Cora's heart pounded in her chest as she made her way back to the hallway. every step echoing through the empty spaces of the estate. The house was watching, waiting for her next move. As the chime rang again, she knew there was no turning back now. The house seemed to close in around Cora as she moved down the shadowed corridors, each step heavier than the last. The creaking of the wooden floors beneath her feet echoed through the silence, the rhythmic sound unsettling in its familiarity. It felt as though she were walking through a place that had never fully let go of her, a place that had been waiting for her return. The faint, distant chime had faded for now, but its lingering presence clung to the walls, weaving through her, thoughts like an inescapable thread. She had to find answers. She had to understand what had happened to Elise, to her family, to the house. Her eyes scanned the dimly lit hallway, each doorway a possibility, each room an enigma. She wasn't sure where she was headed, but instinct guided her steps. It wasn't long before she found herself outside the library, an imposing wooden door that loomed ahead, carved with intricate designs that Cora remembered all too well from her childhood. The door seemed almost too large for the rest of the house, as though it had been meant to symbolize something grander, more important. Cora hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open. It creaked in protest, the sound scraping against her nerves. She entered the room cautiously, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. The library was a sprawling space, lined with shelves that stretched high toward the ceiling, filled with ancient tomes and yellowing manuscripts. The air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of mildew lingered in the corners. The light that filtered through the grimy windows gave the room a cold, faded look. The shadows cast by the high shelves seemed to shift, moving with a life of their own, as though something in the room was aware of her presence. Cora stepped further into the room, her fingers brushing the spines of the books as she walked past them. The weight of time pressed down on her, the knowledge of so many forgotten stories resting just beyond her reach. She had always been drawn to this place as a child, the smell of old paper, the quiet isolation it offered, and the sense that the books contained more than mere words. They were portals, keys to worlds beyond her understanding. Her eyes wandered over the room, searching for something, anything that could help her make sense of the chime, of the house, of Elise's disappearance. And then she saw it, an old leather-bound journal, tucked away on a small table near the far wall. Its pages were yellowed, the cover cracked with age, but there was something about it that drew her in. It was exactly where it shouldn't be. Out of place, forgotten, but waiting for her to find it. Her heart skipped a beat as she approached it, a wave of trepidation rising in her chest. This journal felt important, almost as though it had been left specifically for her to find. She hesitated, her hand hovering over it for a moment, then pulled it toward her. As she opened the cover, a small rush of cold air seemed to sweep through the room, and the chime rang again, faint but insistent, as if it were coming from the journal itself. Cora's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her. This journal was more than just a relic. It held a piece of her past, a piece of Elise, perhaps even a key to everything she had been searching for. She flipped open the first page, her eyes scanning the faded handwriting. It was unmistakably her mother's, scratched, hurried, and full of emotion. The first entry was dated several months before Elise's disappearance. Cora read slowly, her fingers trembling slightly as she held the journal steady. It's been weeks since we've arrived at the estate. The house is so quiet, so distant. The air here feels heavy, like something is pressing down on us. I can hear it in the walls, sometimes at night, when everything else is silent. It's faint, but I know it's there. The chime. Cora's breath quickened. She knew this. She remembered the chime, though it had always seemed so distant. Sound that had never quite made sense. Her mother had heard it too. She turned the page. I asked Thomas about it, but he refuses to acknowledge it. He says it's just the wind, that we're imagining things. But I'm not sure I believe him. He's been different ever since we moved here. Distant, like a shadow in the house. The air feels thick, like the house is alive with something waiting. Something buried. Cora could hear the unease in her mother's words. The same unease she had felt creeping over her as she stepped into the house. It was as if the estate was not merely a structure, but a living, breathing thing, waiting for something, watching. She turned another page, her fingers trembling as she continued to read. Elise is so drawn to the house. She spends hours in the garden, wandering the grounds like she's looking for something. I've tried to talk to her about it, but she just looks at me with those wide eyes, like she's seeing something I can't. I'm starting to wonder if she's hearing it. 2. The chime. She says she likes it. She says it calls to her. Cora's pulse quickened. Her mother's fears, her mother's intuition. It mirrored her own. Elise had heard the chime too. She had been drawn to it. Cora felt her chest tighten, a mix of dread and longing rising in her throat. What had happened to her sister? What had the house done to her? The journal pages began to blur as Cora's mind raced. She flipped through several more entries, each one growing more frantic and desperate. Her mother had been losing her grip on reality. The house had a way of warping perception, twisting thoughts, distorting time. It's getting worse. I don't know how much longer I can stand it. Elise. She's not herself. I saw her last night standing by the old well, staring into the water. She was humming that same chime. And then she smiled at me, but it wasn't her smile. It was something else, something dark. Cora slammed the journal shut, her breath ragged as she tried to steady herself. The weight of what she had read hung heavy in the air. Her mother had known. She had known something was wrong with Elise. She had sensed the same presence Cora was now feeling in the house, but had been unable to stop it. The sound of the chime rang louder now, echoing in the walls of the library. Cora pressed her hands to her temples, trying to block out the sound, but it was as if the chime was inside her head, an insistent voice calling her forward. Suddenly, a cold draft swept through the room, stirring the papers on the table. Cora turned toward the window, her eyes scanning the fog that had begun to gather outside, thick and suffocating. The house felt alive again, pulsing with an energy she couldn't understand. She had to keep going. She had to find Elise, wherever she was. But as Cora stood up, the floorboards creaked behind her. She whirled around, her heart racing, but there was nothing. The library was empty, just as it had been before. Yet the feeling of being watched, of something lurking in the shadows, did not fade. She took one last look at the journal, her hand lingering on the pages. She had learned something today. She had uncovered the truth about her mother's fears, about Elise's strange attachment to the house. But there was more to this story, something hidden beneath the surface that she had not yet discovered. And then, without warning, the chime rang again. This time it was close. Very close. Cora turned, and for the briefest moment, she thought she saw a figure standing in the doorway. A shadow, fleeting but familiar. Elise. Or was it something else? Her breath caught in her throat. The chime rang louder now, almost deafening in its intensity, its sound slicing through the quiet of the library like a blade. Cora's heart raced as the room seemed to shrink around her, the heavy silence pressing in on her chest. She turned toward the door, but there was no one there, just the same empty, musty hallway stretching out before her. The sound of the chime seemed to reverberate off the walls, as if the house itself was breathing, calling her deeper into its grasp. With her hands trembling, Cora closed the journal and set it down on the table, feeling the weight of its secrets hanging in the air. The The chime had always been a part of this place, a haunting echo that resonated in her memories. But now it was more than just a sound. It was a presence. It was as though the house itself was trying to communicate with her, to pull her into its depths, to make her a part of its history. She had to leave the library. The air felt suffocating, thick with a palpable sense of dread. Cora knew that she couldn't stay in this room for much longer. She needed to find some answers, something to explain the terrible weight pressing down on her. But where could she go? She had already explored the house, and every room felt like a trap, a maze with no way out. The chime, always echoing, seemed to draw her in, urging her to follow it, to find the source of its sound. Taking a deep breath, Cora moved toward the door and stepped into the hallway. The cold air brushed against her skin, sending a shiver down her spine. The house was colder now, more oppressive. She felt it, an unseen hand, a force, something watching her from the dark corners of the halls. She couldn't explain it, but she could feel the presence of something ancient and malignant, lurking just out of sight. Her footsteps echoed through the hallway as she walked, the floor creaking under her weight. The house groaned, as though it were alive, as though it were reacting to her presence. She passed the stairs, her gaze lingering on the dark corridor above, but she didn't go up. There was something in the air, something in the house that told her she wasn't meant to go there yet. She turned a corner and found herself in front of a door she didn't recognize. It was a heavy wooden door, much like the others, but this one was different. There was a faint, almost imperceptible mark on it, a strange symbol etched into the wood. It looked like a set of intertwining lines, twisting in on themselves, forming a pattern she had never seen before. It was as though the symbol had been scratched into the door by something old, something powerful. Curiosity gnawed at her, urging her to open the door to see what lay beyond. The chime rang again, louder now, its sound pulsing in the air like a heartbeat. Cora reached for the doorknob, her fingers brushing the cold metal. The door creaked open with a groan, revealing a small, dimly lit room. The room was stark, empty, save for a large, cracked mirror on the far wall. The mirror was framed in tarnished silver, its edges worn, its surface covered in dust. The glass was cracked in several places, distorting the reflection, making everything seem out of place. Cora stepped inside, her heart pounding in her chest, as the door clicked shut behind her with a hollow sound. The air in the room was thick, almost suffocating, and the chime rang once more, louder than ever. But this time it was different. The sound was no longer distant. It was right here, in the room with her. Cora's breath caught in her throat as she turned toward the mirror. At first, she saw nothing but her own reflection, her face pale, her hair disheveled, her eyes wide with fear. But then something shifted. A figure appeared in the mirror, standing just behind her. It was a shadow, indistinct and blurry, but unmistakable. It was her, Elise. Cora gasped, spinning around, but there was no one there. She turned back to the mirror, her heart racing. Elise's figure was still there, standing just behind her, her face obscured by the shadows. But Cora could see the outline of her. Her small frame, her hunched shoulders, the way she stood as if waiting for something. Waiting for Cora. The chime rang again, its sound growing more distorted, more frantic, as if it were trying to communicate something to her. Cora's eyes darted between the mirror and the room, searching for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. Elise was still there, frozen in the reflection, her eyes hollow and unblinking. Cora took a step toward the mirror, her hand trembling as she reached out. The surface of the glass rippled like water, and for a brief moment, Cora saw something else, another reflection, one that was not her own. It was her mother standing in the background, watching them both. A cold shiver ran down Cora's spine as the chime rang once more, this time louder and more insistent. Her mother's reflection was gone, replaced by the figure of Elise who, was now standing closer to her in the mirror, her face clearer, her eyes wide and unblinking. "Elise," Cora whispered, her voice trembling. The figure in the mirror didn't respond. The chime grew louder, reverberating through the room, its sound pulling at Cora's mind, twisting her thoughts. She could feel the weight of it, a suffocating pressure, building inside her chest. Suddenly, the glass of the mirror began to crack, small lines appearing across the surface, spreading outward like a web. Cora took a step back, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The chime reached a crescendo, the sound deafening in the small room. She felt her heart race in her chest as she watched the mirror begin to warp, the cracks spreading faster, distorting, the reflection of Elise. And then, as the chime reached its peak, the mirror shattered. Glass exploded outward, the shards raining down around her like glittering knives. Cora gasped and stumbled back, her hands covering her face instinctively. When she opened her eyes, the room was still. The mirror was gone, shattered into pieces on the floor, its reflection lost forever. But the chime still echoed in her ears, its sound ringing louder than ever. For a moment, Cora stood frozen in place, her mind reeling. What had just happened? Had she seen Elise in the mirror? Or was it just another trick of the house? Was her sister really here? Was she calling to... Huh? The chime began to fade, its sound becoming distant once more, but the unease in the room remained. The air was thick, heavy with the sense that something was still watching her, something that had been here all along. Cora knew she had to leave. The house was not just a structure, it was alive, and it was reaching for her, pulling her deeper into its dark history. But as she turned to leave the room, something caught her eye. There, on the floor amidst the broken glass, was a small object, a locket. Cora knelt down, her fingers brushing the shards of glass as she picked it up. The locket was old, tarnished, its surface scratched and worn. She opened it slowly, and inside she found a faded photograph of Elise. And beneath the photo, scrawled in delicate handwriting, was a single word: "Come." Her breath caught in her throat. Elise had left her this clue, this message. It was a sign. Elise had been here. She had been waiting for Cora to find her. The chime was not just a sound. It was a call. Cora stood up, the locket clutched tightly in her hand. She had no idea where the house would take her next or what it would reveal, but one thing was certain: she couldn't stop now. Elise was here, somewhere in the shadows, and the house was telling her to come. The chime rang once more, its sound a reminder that the path ahead was treacherous, but it was the only path left. Cora took a deep breath and stepped back into the hallway, the weight of the locket heavy in her palm. She was no longer alone. Cora stood in the hallway, the cold metal of the locket pressed into the palm of her hand. Its weight was oddly comforting, as though it were a bridge between her and Elise, an anchor in a house that was quickly becoming a maze of shadows and secrets. The chime still rang in her ears, a steady, insistent rhythm that had taken on a deeper, more haunting quality. It was as if it was guiding her, pulling her in a direction she didn't understand, but couldn't ignore. Her mind raced. As she turned down the corridor, the hallway stretching before her, its walls heavy with the silence of the house. The oppressive quiet seemed to hum with a life of its own. Each step she took felt like she was walking deeper into the heart of the estate, into the very place where Elise had disappeared. She had to know what had happened, had to find some answer, even if it meant facing whatever had taken her sister from her. But as she walked, she felt the strange, unsettling sensation that she was being watched. The air seemed to thicken around her, and the shadows in the corners of the hallway deepened, stretching like dark fingers trying to reach out and grab her. She tried to push the feeling away, but it lingered, gnawing at her. The The chime rang again, clearer now, sharper, closer. But this time, it wasn't just the sound that unsettled her. It was the way the house seemed to respond to it. The walls creaked and groaned, and the floor beneath her feet seemed to shift slightly, as if the entire structure were alive, adjusting to her presence. The sense of unease deepened, and Cora felt a flicker of panic rise in her chest. Her eyes scanned the hallway, and that's when she saw it. At the far end of the corridor, just beyond the staircase that led up to the upper floor, a figure stood. It was too far away to make out clearly, but there was something about the way it moved, or didn't move, that sent a shiver down Cora's spine. The figure was almost waiting, standing perfectly still, but somehow in motion, as though it existed between two worlds, both there and not there at the same time. Cora's breath hitched in her throat. She didn't want to go closer, but she couldn't turn away. The figure seemed to call to her, beckoning her forward with an almost magnetic force. It was a sensation that filled her chest with a cold ache. Was it Elise? Or was it something else? The figure took a small step toward her, or at least it seemed to. The motion was so slow, so deliberate, that it almost appeared to be an illusion. A trick of the light, a shifting shadow in the corner of her vision. But Cora knew better. She had felt it the moment she stepped into this house. This was no ordinary place. The air hummed with a tension that wasn't simply a product of her mind. Something was here, something ancient and waiting. The chime rang again, louder, clearer, like a warning, but the sound didn't seem to come from anywhere specific. It was as though it was coming from everywhere, echoing through the very walls of the house, growing louder and louder with each passing second. The figure was still there, standing motionless, its outline blurry and indistinct, like a photograph that had been smeared with water. Cora couldn't see its face, but she felt it staring at her, its gaze cold and searching as if it knew her every thought. She took a step forward, her feet moving of their own accord. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to leave this house, and never return. But she couldn't. Something held her here. Something tied her to this place, to Elise, to whatever force was behind the chime. With each step she took, the figure seemed to move closer, but never fully into the light. It was as if it existed just beyond her reach, forever trapped in the shadows, flickering in and out of focus. Cora's heartbeat quickened as she moved toward it. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her hands trembling at her sides. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, an explanation, an answer, or perhaps just a glimpse of her sister, her lost sister, who had disappeared without a trace. But then, just as Cora reached the bottom of the stairs, the figure did something unexpected. It turned away. Slowly, deliberately, it began to walk down the hallway, away from her, disappearing into the darkened recesses of the house. Cora stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. She should have called out, but the words caught in her throat. She should have run, but her legs felt like they were made of stone, frozen in place by a force she couldn't understand. The chime rang again, this time louder, more urgent, as if it were calling to her. The figure moved further down the hallway, its silhouette fading into the shadows, its form dissolving like mist in the fading light. Cora took a step forward, compelled by an irresistible pull. She had to follow it. She had to know where it was going, what it wanted. But just as she reached the spot where the figure had stood, a cold gust of wind slammed through the corridor, pushing her back. The air seemed to freeze, and the light in the hallway flickered for a moment. Cora staggered, nearly losing her balance, and when she looked up again, the figure was gone, completely vanished, as if it had never been there in the first place. Sense of disorientation swept over her, and for a moment, she didn't know whether to scream or collapse. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her mind racing with questions. Had she imagined it? Had she been seeing things? The house had a way of distorting reality, of twisting perception. The line between what was real and what was imagined was beginning to blur, and Cora wasn't sure how much longer she could hold on to her sanity. The chime stopped ringing, leaving behind a heavy, suffocating silence. Cora stood in the hallway, her body trembling, the locket still clutched tightly in her hand. She knew that something had changed, that the house was shifting again, that whatever presence she had just encountered was not an illusion. It had been real. Elise, or something that had once been her, was close. And the house was not done with her yet. The walls seemed to press in, the darkness swallowing everything around her. She needed to keep moving, to press on, but the house felt like a living, breathing entity now, its presence overwhelming. Cora's mind raced with the need for answers, for closure, but she couldn't shake the fear that the house was leading her deeper into something far worse than she could have ever imagined. Elise was somewhere inside these walls, lost, waiting, but she wasn't the only one. The silence that followed the disappearance of the figure was suffocating. Cora stood frozen in the middle of the hallway, her mind reeling, trying to make sense of what had just occurred. She had seen it. A figure in the shadows. Its movements, so deliberate, so unsettling. Was it Elise? Or was it something else entirely? The chime had guided her, but now it was gone, its haunting melody replaced by the heavy, thick quiet of the house. The air felt too thick, like it was pressing against her skin, making it harder to breathe. Cora took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but her hands trembled as she clenched the locket tightly in her palm. She couldn't stay here, not in this hallway, not with the oppressive weight of the house pressing down on her. She needed answers, and she needed them now. Her heart hammered in her chest, a painful reminder of the fear she was struggling to hold at bay. But it was no use. The house wouldn't let her leave. She knew it now. Whatever force inhabited this place, it had taken root in her mind, entwining itself with her memories, her grief. It was using her, pulling her deeper into the twisted maze that was the hollow estate. The thought made her stomach churn, but she pressed forward. She turned away from the hallway, feeling the sensation of eyes on her back, though no one was there. Her footsteps felt muffled as she moved toward the end of the corridor, where a door she had not yet explored stood, its surface worn, the wood dark and polished with age. There was something about it that called to her, as if it had been waiting for her to open it, to step inside. As she reached for the doorknob, the house seemed to respond, groaning, creaking, as though it was waking from some long, heavy slumber. The chime was gone now, replaced by the eerie murmurs of the house itself. Cora hesitated for just a moment before twisting the knob and pushing the door open. The room beyond was dimly lit, but not completely dark. Faint slivers of light filtered in through cracks in the shutters, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. The space was cluttered with old furniture, chairs draped in faded cloth, a dusty bookshelf stacked high with forgotten volumes, and a large mirror hanging on the far wall. It was a room that felt both abandoned and unnervingly preserved, as though time itself had stopped here. Cora's eyes scanned the room, searching for anything that might give her a clue about Elise's disappearance. Her gaze lingered on the mirror, its surface clouded with age and grime. The glass was cracked in several places, distorting the reflection of the room. Something about it caught her attention, a fleeting movement, something out of the corner of her eye. She turned quickly, but the room was empty, as still and silent as the rest of the house. Yet the sensation of being watched grew stronger. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a certainty now. Cora wasn't alone in this house. Something, or someone, was here with her, watching her every move. A sudden chill ran down her spine, and she turned back toward the mirror. The reflection was distorted, but in the crack, something moved. A shadow, indistinct but undeniably there. Cora stepped closer, her heart racing, her breath catching in her throat. As she neared the mirror, she felt the air grow colder, heavier. She couldn't take her eyes off the reflection. And then she saw it. A figure standing behind her in the mirror, its face just out of reach. A figure she recognized. It was Elise, or at least it looked like her. Her sister's face was obscured by the crack in the mirror, but Cora could make out her silhouette. She looked as she had the last time Cora had seen her, young, wide-eyed, full of curiosity. But there was something wrong about her. Her eyes were empty, hollow, like the eyes of a ghost. Her skin was too pale, her features distorted by the cracks in the glass. "Elise?" Cora whispered, her voice trembling. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the cold surface of the mirror. But before she could touch it, the figure vanished, just like that. Gone. The mirror returned to its fractured reflection, showing only Cora's own face staring back at her in shock. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she stumbled backward, almost knocking over a nearby chair in her panic. She turned around quickly, but the room was empty. There was no sign of Elise. The chime began to echo again, faint at first, but growing louder as if beckoning her to stay. Cora felt her mind spin, her thoughts racing in every direction. Was it real? Was Elise really here, or was it just another vision, another trick of the house? Cora's head throbbed with the pressure of unanswered questions. The house felt alive, its walls pulsing with some unseen force, its very structure alive with memory and grief. She had to keep going. She had to find Elise. But how? How could she find her when the house itself seemed to shift and change with every step she took? The chime rang louder, clearer, and with it came a sudden, almost unbearable compulsion to follow its sound. She couldn't ignore it any longer. It wasn't just a sound. It was a guide, a promise. Elise was out there somewhere, trapped in this house, and the chime was the only thing that could lead her to her. But the longer she stayed in the room, the more the house seemed to close in on her. The walls pressed inward, the floor creaked beneath her feet, and the shadows deepened, stretching toward her. She had to leave. She had to get out of this room before it consumed her, before the house swallowed her whole. Cora's hands were shaking as she turned and made her way back to the door, her eyes scanning the room one last time. But just before she stepped out, her eyes fell on something. A book on the floor, partially hidden beneath the chair she had almost knocked over. It was old, its leather cover cracked and weathered, as though it had been here for decades, untouched. She reached down and picked it up, feeling the weight of it in her hands. The title on the spine was barely legible, but it read, "The Hollow Echoes." Cora's fingers trembled as she opened the book, and inside she found pages filled with strange, cryptic symbols and writings. The words seemed to dance on the page, shifting in the dim light. Some were in a language she didn't recognize, while others were in her mother's handwriting, distorted, hurried, as though written in a moment of panic. Cora's eyes caught a phrase near the end of the book, written in bold, jagged letters: "The chime will call, and the walls will answer." She felt the weight of those words sink into her chest, a deep, hollow feeling that made her skin crawl. The chime was more than just a sound. It was a force, a signal that something was waking in the house, something that had been dormant, waiting for the right moment. The walls, the book, the mirror, everything in this house was a part of the same dark story, a story that had been unfolding long before Cora had arrived. Elise's disappearance, her mother's madness, the chime, it was all connected. But how? How could she stop it? How could she save Elise? The book slipped from her hands as the chime rang again, louder now, filling her ears and rattling her thoughts. It was time to follow the sound. to go deeper into the heart of the hollow estate. With a final glance at the room, Cora stepped out of the doorway, the darkness swallowing her as she moved deeper into the house, the chime pulling her. Forward! Cora moved quickly down the corridor, the weight of the book and its cryptic message heavy in her hands. The chime had stopped, but its echo still reverberated in her mind, a ghostly rhythm that seemed to pulse in time with her racing heart. The silence that followed was unsettling, almost oppressive. The walls of the house, now more ominous than ever, seemed to watch her every move. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was always just behind her, slipping in and out of the shadows, too fast to be caught, too faint to be truly seen. Her steps carried her toward the far end of the hallway, where the walls curved and the passage became narrower, the air growing colder with each step she took. It was the kind of space that seemed to breathe, as if the house were alive and shifting around her, pushing her forward into some unknown fate. She had no idea where she was going or what she would find, but she knew she couldn't stop, not now. Elise was out there somewhere, and she could feel her presence, faint and flickering, like a candle flame on the verge of being snuffed out. Her eyes scanned the walls of the hallway as she walked, the dim light from the few windows falling just short of illuminating the full extent of the space. The house was old, its bones creaking and groaning under the weight of time. The old wallpaper, once vibrant, now hung in tatters, and the wooden floor beneath her feet was scuffed and worn with age. But something about this section of the house was different. Something felt hidden, like the very walls held a secret. As Cora neared a part of the wall that appeared to be just another stretch of wood paneling, she noticed it. A subtle shift in the texture. A seam barely noticeable at first, but one that seemed to beckon to her, almost as if it were waiting for her to discover it. Her breath caught in her throat as she approached the wall, her fingers running along the smooth surface. It was cold to the touch, colder than the rest of the house. Her heart raced in anticipation as her fingers brushed over the hidden seam. She pressed on it gently, and to her surprise, the paneling gave way. It creaked and groaned, shifting outward, slightly as if the wall itself had been disturbed after years of slumber. Cora stepped back, her breath shallow, her pulse quickening. She hesitated for a moment, then, with a mix of curiosity and dread, she pushed against the panel, and it opened, slowly, reluctantly, revealing a narrow, dark passage behind it. The air that rushed out was cold, musty, carrying with it the scent of earth and decay, as though the passage had not been used in decades. Cora's eyes darted down the corridor before her, but the darkness beyond swallowed everything, leaving her with only the feeling that something was waiting inside. She had to go in. There was no turning back now. Elise's image, her hollow eyes, flashed in Cora's mind. She could hear the faintest whisper, a sound barely audible over the heavy silence of the house, but unmistakably familiar. Cora stepped into the passage, the darkness swallowing her as she moved deeper into the bowels of the house. The walls were narrow here, too close for comfort, and the air felt thick as though the passage itself was alive, its very existence tied to the secrets of the estate. Her footsteps echoed in the confined space, amplifying the feeling that she was being drawn into something far older, far darker than anything she could have imagined. As she moved deeper, the faint, distant sound of the chime returned, ringing softly, as if the walls themselves were whispering. It grew louder as she pressed on, the rhythm of the sound pulling her forward. The house was leading her somewhere. The question was, where? And more importantly, what would she find when she got there? The passage opened up into a small hidden room at the far end. The moment Cora stepped inside, she felt a sharp chill in the air, the temperature dropping dramatically as if she had crossed into another realm entirely. The room was dim, lit only by a faint, flickering light that seemed to come from nowhere. It was circular in shape, its walls covered in strange symbols, symbols that seemed familiar, yet not at all. They were unlike anything Cora had ever seen, ancient and unsettling, as if they were not written with ink, but with something far darker. The room was empty, save for a large stone altar at the center. The altar was worn and weathered with age, its surface covered in dust and cobwebs. A thick black cloth was draped over it, stained with what looked like old dried blood. Cora's eyes scanned the room, her mind racing. This was it, the heart of the house, the place where the ritual had begun, where everything had started to unravel. At first she thought the room was empty, but as her gaze swept across the stone altar, she noticed something, or someone, standing at the far corner, obscured by shadows. Cora's breath hitched. There was a figure there, just barely visible, standing completely still. The figure was tall, draped in tattered robes that seemed to blend into the darkness. Its face was hidden, but Cora could feel its presence, thick and heavy in the air. "Who's there?" Cora called out, her voice trembling, but the figure did not respond. It simply stood there, watching her. She felt the weight of its gaze, even if she couldn't see its eyes. The chime rang again, louder now, its sound filling the room with a steady, rhythmic pulse. Cora's heart beat in time with the sound, her hands growing clammy as she moved closer. The figure didn't move. Its stillness was unsettling, almost suffocating. She stepped forward, her breath caught in her throat, and as she did, she noticed something strange about the floor beneath her feet. There, etched into the stone, were more symbols, symbols like those on the walls of the room. They were arranged in a pattern, spiraling inward toward the altar. As she neared the altar, she reached out a tentative hand to touch it, the cold stone sending a shock of chill through her fingers. Her eyes were drawn to something on the surface, something she hadn't noticed before. It was a small silver key lying in the center of the altar. The key was unlike any she had ever seen, ornate, ancient, with intricate designs that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up, the cool metal sending a strange vibration through her hand. She had no idea what it opened, but she knew it was important. She could feel it. Suddenly, the figure in the corner moved. It didn't step forward, but instead, it turned its head slightly, just enough for Cora to see something that made her heart stop. The figure's eyes glowed, an unnatural, pale blue, flickering like candlelight in the dark. The air around her seemed to freeze, her breath catching in her throat. She felt a deep, bone-chilling sense of dread that washed over her, suffocating her in an instant. The figure spoke, its voice low and rasping, like the wind through cracked windows. "You should not have come." Cora's blood ran cold as the figure stepped forward, the air around it warping, distorting. She stumbled back, her legs trembling beneath her. The room seemed to close in on her, the walls pressing forward, the symbols on them shifting and twisting, coming to life before her eyes. "What is this?" Cora whispered, her voice barely audible. "What is happening here?" The figure's mouth didn't move, but Cora heard the words in her mind, clear and cold. "The house is waking, and it will claim you as it claimed all the others." Cora's eyes darted to the altar, to the key in her hand, and then back to the figure. It was no longer standing still. It was moving toward her now, its form shifting and flowing like smoke, its glowing eyes locked onto hers. Cora turned and bolted, the sound of the chime ringing louder than ever, its voice almost drowning out everything else as she fled down the narrow passageway, the walls closing in behind her. She had to get out of here, had to find a way to stop the house before it consumed her too. But as she reached the doorway, The chime stopped, and the silence that followed was far worse than anything she had felt before. Because now, the house was truly awake. Cora's pulse thundered in her ears as she stumbled out of the hidden room, her chest heaving with each panicked breath. The oppressive darkness of the passage seemed to swallow her whole, and the walls pressed in, as if the house itself were trying to close the gap between her and whatever horrors lay behind. Her hands were shaking as she gripped the silver key, the cold metal burning against her palm. It was a key to something. She didn't know what, but the weight of it in her hand felt like a promise or a curse. The chime had stopped, but the air was still thick with the sense of being hunted. Her heart raced, and every step she took echoed through the hallways, magnifying the tension in the air. It was as though the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something, some pivotal moment to unfold. The walls seemed to shift with every step, stretching, contracting, never staying the same. Cora couldn't shake the feeling that the house was alive, that it was aware of her every movement, every thought. And with each passing second, the sense of unease grew stronger. She had to find out what had happened to Elise, but it felt like the more she uncovered, the less she understood. Each room, each passage, seemed to lead her deeper into an unfathomable darkness. It wasn't just the house. It was the very air she breathed, the very fabric of the place, warped and distorted by something that was older than memory. Cora's footsteps grew more hesitant as she approached the hallway where she had encountered the figure in the hidden room. The walls, which had once seemed so familiar to her, now looked alien, unnatural. She moved past the staircase and made her way toward the main hall, where she had first discovered the broken mirror. The room seemed to beckon to her, and despite the fear gnawing at her gut, she couldn't ignore the pull. As she entered the room, the first thing she noticed was the stillness. It was as if the house had frozen in time. The air hung heavy with the silence, and everything felt too quiet, too perfect. The flickering candlelight from before had died out, leaving the room cloaked in shadow. The mirror, now shattered, still remained, the edges of the broken glass jagged and sharp, reflecting distorted images of the room, as though it were fractured, splintered like her own sense of reality. Cora's breath caught in her throat as she approached the shattered mirror. Her reflection was fractured, distorted into 1,000 broken pieces. For a moment she couldn't recognize herself. Her face was scattered across the jagged glass, each shard a different version of her. Her eyes widened, and she reached out, her fingers trembling as she touched one of the shards. It was cold to the touch, but there was something oddly comforting about it, as if the mirror, even broken, still held a part of her. But as she looked closer, something changed. The shards of glass began to shimmer, and through the fractured reflections, Cora saw something she wasn't expecting. She saw Elise. Her sister was standing there, behind her, her face reflected in the broken mirror, just as she had been before. But now, Elise's image wasn't just a shadow. It was clear, solid, her eyes wide and full of a silent plea. She was reaching out, her hands trembling in the reflection, but the glass distorted her image. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. "Elise," Cora whispered, her voice barely audible, a knot forming in her throat. She turned around quickly, but the room was empty. Nothing. No sign of her sister. Just the same cold, silent space. But the mirror, her reflection, kept shifting, twisting, as if it were alive. It was as if the mirror itself was trying to communicate with her, trying to show her something. The shards seemed to pulse, to vibrate in time with her heartbeat, growing brighter, more intense, until it felt as if they were drawing her in, pulling her closer. The image of Elise was there, clearer now, her face pressing against the broken glass, her lips moving silently, her expression desperate. It was like Elise was trying to say something important. Cora reached out once more, this time pressing her hand gently against the glass, hoping to connect with her sister in some way, to finally understand what had happened. But as her fingers brushed the cold surface, the image of Elise disappeared, replaced by the distorted reflection of Cora's own face. The chime rang again, this time soft, almost mournful. The sound was like a distant lullaby, and for a moment Cora felt a strange sense of peace wash over her, as though the house were trying to soothe her. But it didn't last. The peace shattered like the mirror, replaced by a cold, gnawing terror. Cora felt it, the sensation of something moving behind her, a presence that was far too real to ignore. She whirled around, her eyes darting around the room. The figure, the shadow that had been standing behind her, was there again. But this time, it wasn't just a faint image in the mirror. It was standing in the room with her, solid and looming. Kadi, breath caught in her throat as she backed away, her eyes wide in disbelief. The figure was tall, impossibly tall, its silhouette shrouded in darkness. Its features were hidden in shadow, but Cora could feel its gaze on her, cold and unyielding. She tried to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. Her mind was racing, her pulse hammering in her ears. For a moment, the figure didn't move. It simply stood there, its presence filling the room, suffocating the space around her. And then it took a step forward, slowly, deliberately. Each movement was calculated, like a predator closing in on its prey. "Who are you?" Cora whispered, her voice trembling. Her hand shook as she gripped the locket in her pocket, the cold metal digging into her skin. It was a reminder. She had to keep moving forward. She had to find Elise. But the figure didn't answer. It merely stepped closer, its presence growing, more oppressive, more suffocating with every step. Cora's legs were weak, but she couldn't stop herself from moving. She stumbled backward, her foot catching on the edge of the broken glass, sending shards scattering across the floor. The figure continued to advance, its form now clearer, more defined, but still obscured in darkness. The chime rang again, its sound deafening now, filling the room with an intensity that made Cora's head spin. Her breath quickened as the figure reached out. She had no choice now. She had to run. She turned and bolted toward the door, her mind focused only on escape. But the room seemed to stretch, to lengthen, as if the house itself was pulling her deeper into its labyrinthine walls. The door was too far, the hallway too long, and the sound of the chime filled her ears like a maddening echo, urging her forward into something she wasn't ready to face. The figure's voice, low and cold, cut through the din of the chime. "You cannot escape. The house has already chosen." Cora's heart raced as she reached the door, her hand fumbling for the handle. The darkness was closing in, and the figure was getting closer, its footsteps echoing behind her, steady and unrelenting. She had to get out. She had to find a way to break free from this place. With a final burst of energy, Cora wrenched open the door and sprinted down the hallway, the sound of the figure's pursuit echoing behind her. The chime continued to ring, louder, more insistent, as if the house were calling her back, claiming her. But Cora couldn't stop now. She couldn't give in. She ran, the darkness chasing her, the chime driving her forward into the unknown. Cora's breath came in sharp, erratic bursts as she sprinted down the long hallway, her footsteps a cacophony in the oppressive silence of the house. The figure, its presence so palpable, so suffocating, was still behind her, following, closing, in. Every nerve in her body screamed for her to escape, to flee this nightmare that had ensnared her. But the corridors stretched endlessly before her, winding in strange, impossible angles that felt like they were designed to trap her. The house seemed alive, its very walls bending around her as if it were reshaping itself, reshaping her reality. She couldn't focus on anything except the growing urgency in her chest, the pulse of fear that kept her moving, kept her pushing forward even as the shadows closed in. But even in her panic, something tugged at the edge of her mind, something that refused to let her ignore it. The library. It was a room she had passed through many times before, but it had always felt distant, a place of memory and history. Now, in her fear, it seemed to beckon to her, a place of answers, a sanctuary where she might uncover the truth that the house had buried so deep. She reached the library door, her hand trembling as she grasped the handle. It creaked open with the familiar groan, and the cool, musty air hit her face, carrying with it the faint scent of old paper and dust. The library was just as she remembered, dark wooden shelves stacked with books, the large table in the center of the room, and the faint glow of the dying fire in the hearth. But tonight, the room felt different. It wasn't just a place of refuge anymore, it was something more, something intertwined with the house's secrets, something waiting for her to discover. Cora stepped inside, shutting the door quickly behind her. She leaned against it for a moment, her breath ragged, her eyes darting to every shadow in the room. She could still hear the faint sound of footsteps outside, the figure drawing nearer. But inside this room, she felt the tiniest shred of safety, as if the library, with all its old tomes and forgotten knowledge, might hold the answers she so desperately needed. Her gaze moved to the far corner of the room, where a large, dust-covered desk stood. Papers were strewn across it, and a few old books were stacked haphazardly. The sight of it made her heart race. There was something there, something left behind. She approached the desk slowly, cautiously, as if the house itself might be watching her every move. She paused, reaching out to touch one of the papers. The texture was strange, brittle, like the page might crumble in her hands. But instead of the usual dust that coated everything in the house, this paper was oddly clean. It was covered with old, flowing handwriting, her mother's handwriting. Cora's heart skipped a beat. She had seen this handwriting before, in the journal she had found earlier. She recognized it instantly. "The house is speaking to me." The words were scratched out hastily, as though her mother had written them in a fit of urgency. She read, "On the chime. It calls to those who are meant to hear it. The walls have ears, the floors have eyes, and they remember everything. The ritual, everything that happened before, everything that led us here, is all part of it. I can feel it. Elise, I hear her, but she's not the same. The house is changing her, it's changing me." Cora's fingers trembled as she held the paper, her mind reeling with the words. The house had changed her mother, just as it had changed everything in this place. But it was Elise she was concerned about now. Elise, whose voice had echoed in the mirror, whose figure had appeared in the broken glass. Elise, who had been lost to this house, trapped by its dark magic. There was more. I hear it in the walls, the sound of their whispers. The chime will awaken her, and I fear I will not be able to save her. This house wants something from us, something that no one can give willingly. I have seen its eyes in the walls, its hands in the floors. They are coming for her. Cora's stomach twisted in horror. Her mother had known. She had known that something was taking Elise. Something was using the house to trap her, to change her. Cora had always suspected something was wrong, but this was far worse than she had ever imagined. Her eyes darted to the bookshelf, and instinctively, her feet moved toward it. There had to be something else, something more. She needed answers. She needed to understand how this house could warp minds, twist lives, turn families into mere echoes. Her fingers brushed over the spines of the books, the faded titles barely visible through the thick dust. She reached for a large, leather-bound, volume that seemed to stand out from the rest. Its cover was intricately carved with symbols, symbols that reminded her of the ones etched into the walls of the hidden room. She pulled it from the shelf and opened it, the pages crackling under her fingers. At first, the text seemed normal, a historical account of some old family line or long-forgotten lore. But then, as her eyes scanned the pages, the words began to blur. The ink seemed to move, the letters twisting and curling in ways that defied reason. It wasn't normal text. This was a language she couldn't understand, an ancient, almost incomprehensible script. And then there it was. In the margin of one page, scrawled hastily and out of place, were two words in her mother's handwriting. It's too late. Cora's blood ran cold. Too late for what? She didn't understand. What was too late? The chime rang again, a soft echo, but this time it wasn't just the ringing sound, it was more. It was a voice, faint but unmistakable, like the sound of a distant song in the wind. It was Elise's voice. "Elise," Cora whispered, her heart pounding. She stood frozen for a moment, but then something strange happened. The pages of the book in her hands began to turn, as though they were being flipped by an unseen force. The words on the pages danced and shifted, rearranging themselves into patterns that she could almost understand. She couldn't take her eyes off them, couldn't look away. The pages stopped, and when they did, Cora saw something she hadn't expected. It was a drawing, an image of the house, but not the house she had known. It was different. The walls were covered in strange symbols, the windows shattered, and the roof was twisted, curving up in unnatural ways. But most unsettling of all was the figure standing in front of the house. It was Elise, but her features were twisted, her body contorted in a way that was wrong. Her face was covered in shadows, but her eyes, they were wide, empty, hollow, like the eyes of something that had long since lost its humanity. Cora's breath caught in her throat, and the book slipped from her hands, falling to the floor with a loud thud. The chime rang louder, reverberating in her skull. She turned toward the door, her pulse racing. It was too late, her mother's words echoing in her mind. Elise wasn't just trapped here. She had been changed. The house had taken her, and now it was coming for Cora. The sound of footsteps echoed from behind her, but when she turned, no one was there. The walls seemed to close in, and the room felt colder, the shadows deeper. Cora's eyes darted to the fireplace, where the flames flickered and danced, casting long, unsettling shadows across the room. Something was wrong. The air was thick, as if the very space around her was folding in on itself. The house wasn't just alive, it was waiting. Waiting for her. The chime rang once more, louder now, as if it were calling her back, and this time she knew there was no escaping. The library door slammed shut behind Cora, with a finality that seemed to echo down the entire length of the hall, reverberating through the hollow, oppressive air of the hollow estate. The sound lingered in the space, mingling with the constant, muffled thrum of her heartbeat in her ears. The house, once a familiar and comforting place, now felt like a labyrinth, a web spun by some ancient, malevolent force. Every step she took seemed to draw her deeper into its grip, its walls narrowing, its floors shifting beneath her feet. Cora stumbled back into the center of the room, her chest heaving with the remnants of panic. The chime, the echoing melody that had haunted her since her arrival, still rang in her mind, distant but ever present, like a pulse beneath her skin. It wasn't just a sound now. It was a part of her, woven into the very fabric of her being. She could feel it in her bones, its rhythm steady and insistent, like a heartbeat guiding her through the darkness. She closed her eyes, trying to steady herself. She had seen too much. Her mother's journal, the cryptic book filled with strange symbols, the distorted reflections in the broken mirror, all of it had pointed her toward one truth. This house, this place, was more than just a home. It was a prison for Elise, a prison for everyone who had ever stepped foot inside. But it wasn't just the house that was trapping her now. It was the memories, the guilt, the questions that clawed at her from the inside. What had happened to Elise? What had happened to her mother? And why had she returned here, to this cursed place where every shadow seemed to whisper her name? She opened her eyes again and glanced around the room. The flickering firelight cast long, trembling shadows against the walls. The air was thick, heavy with the weight of 1,000 forgotten stories, 1,000 unspoken truths. There was something in the room, something she hadn't noticed before. On the far wall near the window, the old portrait that had hung in the library for as long as she could remember stood undisturbed, its glass reflecting the dim light. It was a picture of her family, her mother and father, standing proudly before the estate, their faces frozen in a moment of happiness that now seemed alien, almost unreal. Elise, a child in the photo, stood beside them, her wide eyes full of the innocence that Cora had once known. But something about the portrait made her stomach turn. The colors in the painting were beginning to fade, the faces of her parents growing more and more indistinct, as though the photograph itself was starting to erode. But it wasn't just the fading paint that unsettled her. It was the way the portrait seemed to change. Just a little. Her father's eyes, once stern and proud, now seemed hollow. The same hollow emptiness she had seen in the mirror just hours before. Elise's smile, frozen in time, looked forced, wrong. A faint crack appeared along the edge of the frame, as though the house itself was beginning to peel away the very fabric of their memories. Cora's pulse quickened as she stepped closer to the portrait. Her heart pounded in her chest, an odd sense of dread creeping over her. The painting felt alive, its history shifting and changing with every second she stood before it. Was it possible that her family's past was already being rewritten, that the house had taken control of their memories? She reached out with trembling fingers, her breath shallow, and then she heard it, the sound of footsteps behind her. Quiet, at first, but growing louder, closer. Cora spun around, her eyes wild with fear. But when she turned, there was no one there. The room was empty, save for the shifting shadows and the crackling fire. The footsteps grew louder still, and for the briefest moment, Cora thought she saw the silhouette of a figure in the doorway. A tall shadow, too tall, too thin, its edges blurry and indistinct. The figure moved slowly, deliberately, as if it were studying her, its presence almost suffocating in its intensity. "Who's there?" Cora called out, her voice shaky, her pulse thundering in her ears. She backed away from the portrait, her eyes searching every corner of the room, every inch of the darkness that seemed to creep in from the edges. "Show yourself." There was no response, just the relentless sound of footsteps, like the echo of someone walking in a room she couldn't see. The presence in the doorway remained, faint, just a flicker at the edge of her vision. Then, the footsteps stopped. Cora's breath caught in her throat. The silence that followed was deafening, suffocating. The air seemed to thicken, pressing in on her from all sides. The chime rang again. This time it was louder, almost deafening, as if it were coming from inside her own skull. She couldn't take it anymore. She had to get out. The pressure, the fear, the weight of the house, it was all too much. Her legs were shaking beneath her as she turned toward the door, but before she could take a step, she froze. There, standing at the threshold, was the figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, its outline shrouded in shadow. Its face was hidden, its features obscured by the darkness that clung to it like a shroud. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It simply stood there, watching her with a presence that made her stomach turn. Cora's heart hammered in her chest as she stumbled back, her feet scrambling to find purchase on the floor. The figure didn't advance, but its mere presence filled the room, suffocating her, making it impossible to breathe. "What do you want?" Cora whispered, her voice trembling, her throat tight with fear. She wanted to run, wanted to flee this place and never look back. But something held her there, something that made her feel as though she were bound to the house, trapped within its walls. The figure didn't respond. It simply stood there, its presence heavy in the air, as if it were waiting for something, watching her. Cora's eyes darted to the portrait again, and for a fleeting moment, she thought she saw her mother's face flicker in the reflection, her eyes hollow and empty, just like the figure. Was it possible? Was this some twisted version of her family, trapped within the house, unable to escape? "Please," Cora whispered, her voice barely audible. "I need to know what happened to Elise. I need to know why. Why she's here. Why I'm here." The figure remained silent, its gaze unyielding. And then, as if it had heard her, the figure stepped forward, its movement slow and deliberate. Cora's breath hitched in her throat. She had no choice now. She had to face whatever. This was whatever this thing wanted from her. It had taken Elise, and now it was coming for her. The chime rang again, this time louder than ever, filling the room with its maddening sound. It was the house. It was the entity. And it was no longer content to remain in the shadows. Cora knew, without a doubt, that the first break had already occurred. There was no turning back. Cora stood in the center of the library, her breath ragged as the oppressive silence of the house settled in around her. The figure, whatever it had been, was gone, leaving only the lingering echoes of its presence. She had been running on, pure instinct, driven by an overwhelming need to understand, to find answers, to somehow make sense of the chaos surrounding her. But now, in the wake of her encounter with the shadowed figure, she felt the weight of her uncertainty pressing down on her like a heavy cloak. The chime had stopped, leaving only the oppressive quiet of the house. The fire in the hearth had burned low, its flickering light casting shadows across the room. The air felt thick, charged with a tension that seemed to vibrate in the very walls. She had seen too much, uncovered too many secrets, but every step she took seemed to lead her deeper into a maze with no exit, no end. Her hands were trembling as she reached for the book that had fallen to the floor. The pages were still, eerily, silent now, as though they too were waiting. Cora picked it up, her fingers brushing over the worn leather cover. She had learned so much already, the symbols, the strange rituals, her mother's frantic writings, but it felt like something was still missing. There was a piece of the puzzle that was eluding her, some key that she couldn't yet find. She had to keep moving forward. She had to keep searching. She glanced toward the door, her mind torn between the overwhelming desire to escape and the nagging pull to uncover the truth that seemed to be buried in this house. She didn't know how much longer she could take. The constant pressure, the unyielding fear, the sense that the house was closing in on her. But as her eyes fell upon the portrait of her family once again, something caught her attention. The portrait was no longer the same. The familiar faces of her parents had faded even more, the paint now a ghostly blur of colors. Elise's image, once bright and clear, now appeared almost as if it had been erased, her features warped, her smile twisted. Something had shifted in the painting, something subtle but undeniable. It was as though the house was changing the bar, memory itself, distorting it to fit its own narrative. Cora's stomach twisted with a cold dread. How much control did this place have? Was it rewriting everything, not just the past, but the present? She thought back to her encounter with the figure. Had it been a manifestation of the house's power? Or was it something far darker? Whatever it was, Cora could feel it shifting beneath her feet, pulling at her, threatening to consume her entirely. With a deep breath, she pushed the fear aside. She couldn't afford to fall apart, not now. Elise needed her. Her mother's journal, the hidden room, the cryptic books, everything had pointed her toward one thing. The house wasn't just trapping people physically, it was trapping them, in its own twisted version of time. And if she didn't find the key, the answer, the thread that would unravel it all, she would be lost to it as well. She pushed herself off the table and walked to the center of the room, her eyes scanning the shelves once more. There had to be something. Another clue, another key. But nothing seemed to stand out. The books all appeared the same, dusty, worn, their titles faded into obscurity. But as her fingers brushed along the shelves, they stopped on one particular book, a thin, unassuming volume that had been hidden behind a stack of older tomes. She pulled it out, intrigued by its simplicity. It was small, bound in a faded green leather, and the title on the spine was barely visible, Chronicles of the Hollow. Her heart skipped a beat. The Hollow Estate, this book, this title, it felt like a sign, like she had finally found the missing link. She opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the pages. The words were written in a language she didn't recognize, the script flowing in intricate loops and curves. But at the very bottom of the page, scrawled hastily in a different hand, were words that stood out in stark contrast to the flowing text. It is not the house that keeps us here. It is the hour. The words burned into her mind, and her breath caught in her throat. The hour? What did it mean? The house had its chimes, its distortions, its manipulations of time. But what did this have to do with the hour? Cora felt her pulse quicken as she flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning. The cryptic text. The language was unfamiliar, but the meaning was clear. Something had been set in motion, a trap, a ritual that had bound the estate to time itself, like a clock ticking relentlessly towards some inevitable conclusion. The book began to describe something else, an ancient ritual tied to the house's foundation, something that had been performed long before her family had ever set foot here. Cora's eyes flicked over the words, her mind racing as she absorbed the information. It wasn't just a curse, it was a cycle, a loop that repeated over and over, trapping everyone who came into the house within it. The ritual was designed to keep the house alive, to feed on those who entered its walls, to twist time and memory, and to keep the victims trapped within its corridors for eternity. Cora's hands clenched around the book, the truth dawning on her with terrifying clarity. The house was alive, yes, but it wasn't just alive in the way she had thought. It was feeding off time itself. It was trapping people within moments, stretching and bending time until the hours were lost, until they ceased to matter. Elise hadn't just disappeared. She had been lost in time. Her mother too. And Cora was no different. She had entered the house, and now she was caught in its cycle. The chime rang again, louder now, more urgent, and Cora's heart skipped. The sound wasn't just a warning, it was a countdown. The house wasn't just trapping her in time, it was pulling her closer to its inevitable conclusion. She had felt it in every room, in every shadow. Time was collapsing in on itself, and if she didn't break free, she would be lost too. Cora slammed the book shut, her hands shaking as the weight of the realization settled over her. The house wasn't just about physical walls. It was about the boundaries of time, the hours that had been stolen, twisted, and corrupted. It was about memories that could be erased, rewritten, turned into something else entirely. She glanced back at the portrait, her mother and father now little more than blurred shapes in the faded canvas, their faces becoming less distinct with every passing second. Elise's image, too, was starting to vanish, just as her memory had. The house had begun to claim them, erasing them from existence, twisting them into something else. Cora felt the urgency build within her, a frantic need to escape, to do something before the house consumed her too. She had to stop it. She had to break the cycle before it was too late. But as she turned toward the door, she felt it, an overwhelming weight pressing down on her chest. It was as though the very walls of the house were closing in. She was trapped, and the hour was running out. And just as she reached for the handle, she heard something, a whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable. Elise. Her heart stopped. It was her sister's voice, faint but clear, and it was coming from the other side of the door. Cora's heart was racing, her breath shallow, as she gripped the door frame with white-knuckled hands. The whisper, Elise, had frozen her in place. The voice wasn't just a sound in the distance, it was real. It was here, in the walls, in the very air she was breathing. It was impossible to ignore, impossible to dismiss as a trick of the mind. Her sister's voice, faint yet so tangible, was calling to her, and the pull of it was magnetic. Every instinct inside her screamed to follow it, to open the door and find Elise, to free her from whatever this house had become. But something held her back. A gnawing, gut-wrenching sensation that if she opened the door, everything she had worked so hard to uncover, everything she had pieced together would slip through her fingers. She had learned so much about the house, about the cycle it trapped its victims in, about the way time bent and twisted within these walls. It was no longer just a house, it was a prison. And no matter how much she wanted to believe that opening the door would bring her closer to Elise, a part of her feared it might be the final step into the very thing she had been running from. The chime rang again, louder, almost deafening, its sound pulsing like a heartbeat beneath her skin. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to drown it out, trying to hold on to the last threads of clarity that remained in her mind. The chime, the voice, the whispering, it was all part of the house. It was drawing her in, testing her resolve, threatening to consume her, just as it had consumed her family. But Elise's voice, Elise was still out there. It was the one thing that kept her from turning back, the one thing that made her feel like there was still a thread of hope. The terror of what she might find, the horror of what might be waiting behind the door, was outweighed by the desperate need to save her sister, to bring her home, to end this nightmare. She gripped the door, handle her fingers cold and trembling as she twisted it. The door creaked open, and Cora stepped into the hallway, her eyes immediately drawn to the source of the voice. The hall was dark, unnaturally so, as if the house itself had swallowed the light. The air felt heavier here, suffocating, like the very atmosphere had thickened. It was the same hallway she had passed through before, but now it felt different. It felt distorted, as though the walls themselves had shifted in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. The house was responding to her presence, to the choice she had just made. The time was running out. The voice had stopped. The silence that followed was oppressive, the kind of silence that pressed down on your chest, making it harder to breathe, harder to think. Cora moved forward cautiously, her heart thudding in her ears, her pulse a drumbeat in the otherwise still air. She felt the weight of the house around her, the heavy, suffocating presence of something ancient, something that had been waiting for this moment. The chime had stopped ringing, but its echo lingered in the corners of her mind, wrapping around her thoughts, pushing her forward. She walked past the familiar portraits on the walls, the faded tapestries hanging limp like ghosts from another time. The hallway seemed to stretch longer than she remembered, the distance between each step growing more and more unnatural. It felt like the house was bending, warping, as if it were trying to keep her from reaching the end. She had to keep going, though. Elise's voice had called to her, and she couldn't let fear stop her now. At the end of the hallway, the door to a small, dark room stood slightly ajar. A thin sliver of light filtered through the crack, but it wasn't the same light she had seen in the rest of the house. This light was cold, harsh, like a spotlight from some twisted stage. The room beyond it was shrouded in shadows, the walls obscured by something that couldn't quite be seen, but could be felt. A suffocating presence that seemed to reach for her from the other side of the door. Cora hesitated, standing at the threshold, her hand resting on the doorknob. Her mind screamed at her to turn back, to leave the room behind and never look back. She could almost hear her mother's voice, faint and distant, warning her, telling her that the house was not to be trusted. But Elise's voice, faint and broken, still echoed in her ears, still called her forward. With one final breath, she pushed the door open. The room was small, its corners swallowed by shadow, the light cast from an unseen source stretching long, unsettling shadows across the floor. The walls were lined with old bookshelves, but there were no books here. Only piles of old, yellowed papers, sheets of crumpled parchment, scattered across the floor like discarded memories. The air smelled faintly of mildew and rot, but there was something else there, something that made her skin crawl, a faint metallic scent like blood hanging in the air. She stepped further into the room, her eyes scanning the space, searching for any sign of Elise, but there was nothing. No one. The room was empty, or was it? Cora's eyes fell to the far corner of the room where a large, ornate mirror stood, its surface covered in layers of grime. It was a heavy piece, the frame dark wood, intricately carved with swirling designs that seemed to move as she looked at them. The mirror was massive, much larger than any Cora had seen in the house before, and it took up most of the space along the wall. It seemed out of place here, like it didn't belong. But as she looked at it, she saw something in the reflection that made her blood run cold. Her own face stared back at her, but it wasn't her face, not entirely. There was something wrong with it. Her features were twisted, her eyes wide, her mouth stretched into a grotesque, silent scream. But it wasn't just her reflection that had changed. Behind her, in the mirror, a figure stood. Elise, her eyes hollow and dark, her body contorted unnaturally. She was there, but not really. Her figure flickered, like a glitch in a broken film, her form shifting in and out of focus. Cora's heart pounded in her chest as she reached out toward the mirror, her fingers trembling. Elise's image didn't move, didn't speak, but Cora could feel it. An overwhelming, cold presence that pressed down on her from all sides. She reached out, her fingers brushing the cold surface of the glass. But as she did, the reflection of Elise's face began to distort even more. Her features twisted, her eyes rolled back into her head, and her mouth opened wide in a silent scream. Cora recoiled, stumbling backward, the image of Elise fading, vanishing into the murky glass. The house shuddered, as if it were reacting to her fear, reacting to the truth she had uncovered. The chime rang again, louder now, a sickeningly sweet melody that reverberated through the room, a call from the depths of the house, pulling her closer to something far worse than she had ever imagined. "Elise," Cora whispered, her voice trembling barely above her breath. "What happened to you?" But the reflection in the mirror remained silent, its only answer the soft creeping sound of the chime, like a heartbeat fading in and out, pulling her deeper into the house, into the darkness, into the truth she was too terrified to understand. The price of the chime was coming due. Cora stood frozen, her hand still outstretched toward the mirror, her pulse thundering in her chest. The distorted image of Elise's face lingered in her mind, its grotesque transformation seared into her memory. The room around her seemed to contract, the walls pressing inward, closing her in, suffocating her. The chime had ceased, but its echo still reverberated in the corners of her mind. It was as if the house itself was breathing, alive with a force that pulsed through the air, waiting, watching. The silence that followed was thick, oppressive, and Cora could feel the weight of it bearing down on her. Every inch of the room, every corner seemed to be crawling with something unseen, something that watched her every move. She couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone in the room, that the darkness around her was not just a void, but something more, a presence, waiting for the right moment to strike. She took a hesitant step back, her breath shallow, her heart still racing from the horrors she had just witnessed. The mirror's surface had returned to its normal state, reflecting nothing but her own trembling form. But she couldn't let it go. She couldn't ignore the feeling that Elise's presence was still here, just beyond her reach, lingering, in the shadows. That's when she felt it. A cold breath against the back of her neck. Cora's body went rigid with terror, her eyes wide as the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She spun around, her breath catching in her throat, but the room remained as it had been, empty, still, silent. Her pulse pounded in her ears, but there was no one there. No one but her. It was in my head, she thought desperately, her mind clinging to the hope that it was just a trick, just another illusion conjured by the house. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but as she exhaled, the air felt colder, denser. The room seemed to grow darker, the shadows stretching and warping as if the very light in the room was being sucked away. The momentary calm shattered when she felt someone, brush against her shoulder. It was cold, so cold it seemed to freeze her skin. Cora gasped, stepping back, but as she did, the air seemed to shift around her, tightening, pressing in. She whirled around again, but this time the shadows were different. They were moving, crawling, shifting like something alive, something that wasn't content to remain in the corners anymore. Her breath came out in ragged bursts as she backed away, her eyes frantically scanning the room. She could feel it now, the presence, the weight of it, lingering just beyond her reach, watching her from every angle. It was in the walls, in the shadows, in the very air she breathed. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice trembling but desperate, too terrified to remain silent. "Show yourself." For a long moment, there was nothing but the stillness of the room. But then, without warning, the sound came, a low, guttural growl, like the rumbling of thunder just beneath the surface. It wasn't a voice. It was something darker, something primal, a sound that seemed to come from the very heart of the house itself. And then, it happened. A force slammed into her from behind, throwing her forward. She cried out, her hands hitting the floor as she stumbled, her vision blurring. She twisted her body around, trying to push herself up, but something held her down. A weight, an unseen hand pressing against her chest, forcing the air from her lungs. Panic surged through her as she struggled, pushing against the unseen force, but it was no use. The pressure on her chest was unbearable, and she could feel the floor beneath her shifting, moving as though the very foundation of the house was alive. The walls creaked, groaned, and for a moment, Cora thought she heard voices, whispers, far off but clear in the depths of her mind. Elise. The word escaped her lips before she could stop it, the desperation in her voice clear. It was the only thing that could ground her in the chaos, the only tether to the world she had left. The whispers seemed to respond to her, swirling around her like a tempest, pulling her deeper into the suffocating void. But there was something else now, something more real, more tangible. A figure appeared in front of her, its form barely visible at first, but then it solidified, materializing out of the darkness. It was tall, impossibly tall, its features obscured by the shadows. Its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, were glowing faintly, the color of sickly amber burning with an unnatural intensity. The figure's presence was suffocating, overwhelming. Cora could feel its gaze, even though she couldn't see its face. She could sense it in the very air around her, pressing down on her, wrapping her in a cocoon of fear. Every instinct told her to run, to get up and flee, but her body refused to obey. It was as if the house had taken root inside her, its power paralyzing her, forcing her to face whatever had come for her. The figure moved closer, its movement smooth, fluid, like it was gliding over the floor. It reached out, its hand, a blur of shadow and darkness, and Cora felt the weight of its touch as it brushed against her cheek. The coldness was unbearable, like ice seeping into her very soul, freezing her thoughts, freezing her breath. No, she thought, her mind screaming, this can't be real. But it was. It was real, and it was happening. She could feel the figure's presence invade her mind, could hear the whispers growing louder, pushing into her thoughts, distorting them, reshaping them. The chime rang again. But this time it was a cacophony, a rising wave of noise that filled her ears, drowning out everything else. The house remembers, the figure whispered, its voice not spoken aloud, but felt deep within her mind. It wasn't a sound, it was a presence, a force, a promise. It remembers everything, and it will never let you go. Cora's chest tightened, the air choking her as if the house itself were trying to crush her under its weight. Her mind spun in a dizzying whirl, the whispers overwhelming her, drowning her in their cold, dark embrace. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. The figure was everywhere, its presence suffocating her, the whispers driving her mad. Her body trembled beneath the invisible pressure, and she could feel her vision darkening at the edges. The house had taken everything, her memories, her sister, her family, and now it was taking her. But Elise, Cora thought desperately, I have to find Elise. In that moment, everything in her mind came crashing together. The house, the chime, the voices. Everything was part of the same tangled web. The house wasn't just a place, it was a force that had always been here, waiting for the right moment to claim her, to claim them all. She realized then that she had been wrong. It wasn't about escaping. The house had already taken hold, and now it was demanding its price. The figure loomed over her, its presence like a dark shadow covering the room, suffocating her. And for the first time, Cora felt her mind break, just a little. The house had won. But there was still one thing left to do, one last question, one final thread to pull. Elise, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Where are you? The figure paused, and in that brief moment of stillness, Cora's mind screamed in anguish. She had been so close, too close, and yet the house had claimed her. The figure's hand hovered over her, and in that instant, everything shattered. The floor beneath her feet cracked open, the walls closing in as she felt herself falling into the abyss. But somewhere in the distance, she heard it. The faintest whisper of Elise's voice, softer than before, like a distant echo, fading, but still there, Elise, and then the world went dark. Still here? Brave. Or maybe you just like the feeling of being watched. Like, subscribe, and drop your time and location in the comments, so we know who's still out there. Now breathe slow. The worst is coming. Cora's eyes snapped open, her body jerking upright as a cold, unbearable chill filled her lungs. The room around her was dark, but there was something familiar about the stillness. She was no longer on the floor of the library. The house, no, the estate, had swallowed her whole, pulled her deeper into its shadows, into its grasp. The air was thick and oppressive, pressing down on her chest with a weight she couldn't explain. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears, slow and heavy. She blinked against the darkness, but everything was muted, blurred, like the world was wrapped in a veil of fog. The smell of mildew, decay, and something else, something metallic, hung in the air, thickening the silence. She was still here, still trapped in the hollow estate, where time bent and reality fractured. Her thoughts were hazy, clouded by the surreal events that had led to this moment. She had been so sure she was close to the truth, so sure that she could save Elise. But now that certainty felt distant, like a dream she could barely hold on to. Cora staggered to her feet, her legs weak, and caught herself against the wall. Her vision blurred, the world around her swaying like a ship caught in a storm. The house was shifting again, twisting in ways she couldn't comprehend. Every step felt like a battle against the very fabric of reality. She had to keep moving. There was no other choice. Elise was still out there, somewhere in the maze of the estate. She had to find her before the house swallowed them both whole. But as Cora pressed forward, a strange, gut-wrenching noise stopped her in her tracks, a soft, muffled sound coming from somewhere nearby, deeper in the house. It was a sound she had heard before, but it had never sounded so close, so real. The faintest whisper, followed by the sound of dragging footsteps, slow and deliberate, scraping against the floor. Cora's breath caught in her throat. The hair on the back of her neck stood on end as she realized she wasn't alone anymore. The house had always made her feel like she was being watched, but now it felt different. This presence was more than just a sensation. It was real. Someone or something was moving in the dark just beyond her reach. She strained her ears, trying to listen for any clues, anything that might give her an idea of what was happening. But the sounds continued, growing louder, nearer. Her pulse quickened as the footsteps grew more distinct. A figure was moving toward her, its shadow stretching along the walls, like a living thing, shifting with every passing second. Cora's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't explain it, but she knew. The thing coming for her wasn't human. The sound wasn't just footsteps. It was the dragging of something else, something heavy, something that didn't belong. And then it stopped. The silence in the hallway grew suffocating. Cora felt her breath freeze in her chest as she strained to hear. Her feet moved without thought, carrying her toward the source of the sound. Each step felt like a betrayal, like she was walking into a trap she couldn't escape. But she couldn't stop herself. Elise was out there. She had to save her. She turned the corner, and then she saw it. A figure hunched over, moving slowly in the dim light, dragging something behind it. It was tall, too tall, its body twisted and unnaturally long. The limbs were distorted, too thin, too long, moving in jerking, inhuman motions. Its face was hidden in shadow, but Cora could see the faint outline of its features, sharp, angular, almost skeletal. Its eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness, were wide and hollow, reflecting a malevolent emptiness. The thing stopped, its head jerking toward her, its eyes locking onto hers. A sickening, guttural noise escaped its throat, a low growl that rattled her bones. Cora froze, unable to move, unable to speak. The creature's gaze held her, unblinking, and in that moment, she realized what it was. It was Elise. No, it couldn't be. The figure that had once been her sister was now a twisted, broken thing, a shell of the person she had been. The house had taken her, it had corrupted her, transformed her into something monstrous. She was no longer human. She was a thing of shadow and darkness, trapped in the estate like all the others. The creature, the thing that had once been her sister, let out another guttural cry and took a slow step toward her. Cora's chest tightened, her mind racing. She couldn't move, couldn't think. Everything in her screamed to run, but her body refused to obey. Elise's figure lurched toward her, dragging something behind it, a broken, twisted part of the house itself. The floorboards creaked with each movement, as if the very ground was trembling beneath the weight of this nightmare. And then, just as the thing was about to reach her, a flash of light, the faintest, strangest flicker of illumination, cut through the darkness, momentarily blinding her. The creature screeched, its form flickering and twisting as the light pulsed around it, before it collapsed to the ground in a heap. Cora fell to her knees, gasping for air, her chest tightening in a suffocating panic. The light in the hallway flickered again, and she realized it wasn't just a trick of the mind. The house itself was reacting to her presence. The light wasn't natural. It wasn't coming from anything visible. It was as if the house, the estate, was trying to protect her, or was it trying to stop her? Her heart raced. There was no time to think. She couldn't stay here any longer. The house was alive with too much rage, too much hunger, and it wouldn't let her go. She had to get out. She had to find a way to break the cycle. Her eyes fell on the creature that had once been Elise. The thing was twitching, convulsing on the floor, its body jerking as if something inside it were trying to escape. It was a grotesque parody of her sister, something that had once been human but was now twisted beyond recognition. Elise was gone, but the house had kept her, had kept them all. Cora's legs buckled beneath her, and she pushed herself upright, staggering toward the exit. But she couldn't stop herself from glancing back at the thing on the floor. She saw something in the creature's eyes, something that might have been Elise's humanity, and it chilled her to the bone. She reached the door, but just as her hand touched the knob, the floor trembled beneath her, the walls groaning, the house shifting once more. The house was waking up. The house was feeding. And Cora knew in that moment that she would never leave unless she made the choice. To leave or to fight, and the cost would be her soul. The house was alive. The thought spiraled in Cora's mind like a vortex, drowning out every other coherent thought. The floor beneath her feet shifted again, groaning, creaking, as if something vast and terrible were turning within its bowels, a thing that had lain dormant for far too long. The walls, those hollow, ancient structures, seemed to pulse with an unseen heartbeat, a rhythm that thrummed through the air, vibrating in the very marrow of her bones. Cora could feel the house pushing against her, pressing her into its web, its dark, unyielding grip tightening with every breath she took. There was no escape, not now. The more she tried to break free, the more she realized the house wasn't just trapping her, it was waiting. It was waiting for something that only she could give it. Her pulse raced as she stumbled through the darkened hallway, the air thick and suffocating. Her breath came in ragged gasps, but she couldn't stop. Not now. She couldn't afford to be paralyzed by fear, not when the very thing she had been trying to avoid was closing in. Elise, the distorted, broken version of her sister, still lay in the hallway behind her, twitching, crawling, waiting for her to make the final choice. The choice was no longer a question of how to escape. It was how to save her sister, and in doing so, save herself from the curse that had claimed them all. Cora reached the end of the hallway, her hand desperately seeking the door. But there was something different now. A coldness that gnawed at her soul. The faintest whisper, like the echo of Elise's voice, brushed against her ears, so soft that it could have been nothing more than the wind. But she knew it wasn't. Elise. Her voice cracked, breaking under the weight of the question she had been carrying with her all these years. Her sister's name slipped from her lips like a prayer, a desperate plea. But the answer didn't come in words. It came in the pulse of the house, the rhythmic, persistent chime that had once been a sound of distance, but now was a beat that echoed in her mind, binding her to this place. Cora's hand shook as it hovered over the doorknob. She had to open it. She had to walk through it. even if the house was demanding that she face its dark truth. But as her fingers brushed the cold metal, the room seemed to close in on her. The darkness grew heavier, more tangible, as if the very air was made of shadows. The door felt like a wall now, a barrier between her and the truth she had spent so long trying to deny. She closed her eyes, hearing the whisper again. Only now it wasn't just Elise, it was something more. The house, in all its terrible, ancient power, was speaking to her. It wasn't asking, it was commanding. Come to me. The words were in her mind now, a voice not spoken aloud, but felt deep in the recesses of her thoughts. It was not a voice she recognized, but it was familiar, something she had known all along. The house had always been with her. It had shaped her. It had shaped her family, their memories, their fears, their hopes. The house had claimed them, and now it was calling her to fulfill its cycle. Her breath hitched. The chime rang again, louder now, a desperate wail of sound that seemed to bend her will, to twist her resolve. She felt the house pulling her toward it. She was caught between the past and the present, between the memories she had fought so hard to remember and the truths she couldn't escape. It was too much. She couldn't bear it. And yet, there was something about the way Elise's distorted form twitched in the hallway, the way her broken, twisted body writhed on the floor. It wasn't Elise anymore. It couldn't be. Not after all this. But still, something about her, the way her eyes darted toward Cora, the way she seemed to reach out despite herself, told Cora that there was still a piece of her sister left. Something that hadn't been consumed by the house. Something she could save. The house doesn't just trap, it corrupts, it consumes. The realization hit her like a wave. The house had been feeding on them, on their memories, on their lives. Elise had been lost in its grasp. But Cora wasn't lost yet. She still had a chance to break the cycle. She had to destroy the thing that was feeding on her, that was feeding on all of them. She had to stop the house before it claimed anyone else. But how? The door in front of her seemed to pulse, the wood groaning as if it were alive. Cora took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The moment she stepped through, the air changed. It was colder, the walls darker. She stepped into a room she hadn't seen before, though it felt as if she had always known it was there. The room was large, the ceiling high above her, draped in shadows. It was an old room, ancient even, like a forgotten part of the house that had been sealed away for generations. The air was thick with dust, the floor covered in strange symbols, like a ritual had taken place here long ago. The center of the room was dominated by a large stone altar, its surface covered in old, brittle candles that had long since burned out. The walls were lined with more symbols, intricate looping designs that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. At the far end of the room, just beneath the high arched windows, there was something else. A large mirror. No, not just a mirror. It was a doorway. A portal. Cora's feet moved of their own accord, carrying her toward it. She could feel it, the pull of it, like a magnet drawing her closer. She didn't need to see it more clearly to know what it was. It was the source of the house's power. The portal was where everything began, where Elise had been lost, where everything Cora had tried to avoid would come to a head. But as she stepped closer to the mirror, something changed. The air around her seemed to vibrate with an unseen force, a low hum that resonated deep in her chest. The room shifted. The altar trembled. And the figure, the creature that had once been her sister, stirred in the hallway behind her. Cora's breath caught in her throat as she turned, but it was too late. Elise, no, the thing that had once been Elise, was standing there, towering, in the doorway. Her features were twisted, no longer recognizable, but her eyes, the hollow, empty eyes, stared back at Cora, pleading, begging for something that she couldn't quite understand. It was then that she realized the truth. The thing that had been her sister, the creature that had been twisted by the house, was not the enemy. It wasn't what she had been fighting. The house, the cycle, the corruption. It was all bound to the portal, the entity that had consumed. Elise was feeding off her, using her as a vessel, as a symbol. It was the house itself. And now, Cora had a choice to make. She could continue running, continue fighting the entity that was consuming her sister. She could leave the house, but it would only follow her, infecting every step of her life. Or she could destroy the portal, destroy the heart of the house, and free Elise from its grip, even if it meant sacrificing herself. The door to the mirror shimmered, the air thickening around it. Cora stepped forward. The house was waiting, and so was
Elise.
Cora stood at the edge of the room, the mirror before her shimmering with an almost hypnotic allure. The house felt like it was holding its breath, as though every inch of it were listening, waiting for her to make her choice. The chime, now distant, pulsed through the walls like the beating of a dark heart, its rhythm steady and unyielding. She could feel the weight of it in her chest, the pulse of the house echoing through her veins, pushing her forward, urging her to step closer. She could see the reflection of the room in the mirror, but it wasn't the same as the reality around her. The room in the mirror was dimly lit, almost spectral, with shadows that clung to the walls and moved like living things. The altar was there, its surface cracked and covered in the remnants of old, withered candles. But the most unsettling thing was the figure standing before the mirror. It wasn't Elise, not the version she remembered, at least. The creature that had been her sister was there, but now she was more than a twisted reflection. Her eyes were no longer just hollow. They seemed to burn with an unholy light flickering in the dim space. Her form was a blur, like a shadow that hadn't fully solidified yet, and the figure twisted in and out of the reflection, growing and shrinking with each heartbeat. She wasn't just a part of the house anymore. She was tied to it, like a phantom, bound by some ancient curse. "Elise," Cora whispered, her voice trembling, a wave of grief crashing over her. Her sister's name felt like a prayer, like an invocation to some long-lost piece of herself that was trapped behind those hollow eyes. The creature in the mirror tilted its head as if recognizing her, but it didn't speak. Instead, a sound, low, guttural, and inhuman, rumbled from deep within the reflection. The house responded, its walls groaning, as if acknowledging the unspoken communication between them. The figure reached out a hand, but it was slow, its movements jerky and unnatural, as though it was still fighting the house's hold on it. Cora's heart clenched in her chest. She knew deep down that this wasn't her sister anymore. Elise had been consumed, lost to the house long ago. But the thing standing before her wasn't an enemy. It wasn't the source of the darkness. No. It was trapped, just like Cora, just like everyone who had ever entered the Hollow Estate. The house was the true enemy. The house had taken everything, her family, her memories, her sanity. It had twisted everything into something unrecognizable, feeding on the living and the dead alike. And now it wanted to trap her too. It wanted to feed on her. Her fingers clenched around the locket, the cold metal a reminder of the connection between her and Elise, a symbol of everything she had lost. She had no more time to waste. The longer she hesitated, the stronger the pull of the house would become, dragging her into the same darkness that had consumed her sister. She couldn't let that happen. Cora took a deep breath, her gaze never leaving the mirror. She could feel the pressure building in the room, the energy of the house thickening, pushing her, compelling her to make the choice. She had to destroy the house, destroy the portal, but to do that she had to face the heart of the house, the very source of its power. The mirror was the doorway, She knew that now. It was the entry point, the place where the house's magic bled into the world, where the memories and spirits were trapped in endless loops, waiting for someone to break the cycle. The house had always been alive, and the mirror had been its null heart, the point where it had been fed and strengthened by the souls of those it had consumed. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. If she destroyed the mirror, if she shattered the portal, she might never escape. The house would collapse in on itself, taking everything with it. Elise, her family, everything she had ever known. There would be no going back. But what choice did she have? Could she really leave, knowing what had happened to her sister, knowing that the house would simply claim another victim in the future? No. The word was barely a whisper, but it was enough to break the silence that had settled over the room. She had made her choice. There was no more hesitation, no more running. She couldn't let the house continue. She couldn't let it claim any more lives. Cora stepped forward, her body trembling with a mix of fear and resolve. The mirror was the key. It was the answer, the source of the house's power, and it had to be destroyed. She could feel the energy within it, the pulse that radiated out from its center. The reflection of her sister, or what was left of her, flickered and twisted, trying to reach out to her, but Cora didn't look away. With every step she took, the house responded. The walls groaned, the floors shifted, and the air grew thick, pressing in on her, pushing against her like invisible hands. The temperature in the room dropped, and she could feel the chill crawling up her spine. But she pressed on. She had no choice. As she reached the mirror, she raised her hand, gripping the silver key that had been hidden in her pocket. The key, the one that had been left behind for her to find. She didn't understand it, but now she knew what it was for. The key was the last piece, the catalyst that would end this nightmare. She had to use it to unlock the portal, to break the houses. Hold on her. She took a deep breath and slid the key into the small, hidden slot at the base of the mirror's frame. The moment she did, the air around her seemed to explode with energy. A sharp, blinding light flooded the room, and Cora gasped, her hands flying to her face to shield her eyes. The light was overwhelming, filling every corner of the room, flooding her senses. For a moment, everything was pure, untainted light, a searing, beautiful whiteness. But then it cracked. The mirror shattered, its surface fracturing into millions of tiny shards, each piece reflecting a distorted version of Cora's face. The light dimmed, but the crackling energy remained, swirling around her like a storm. The chime rang out one last time, its sound now a terrible, deafening roar, filling her mind, her body, everything around her. The house shook, its very foundation groaning as if it were alive and dying all at once. The walls trembled, and Cora could feel the ground beneath her feet shift. It wasn't just the mirror that was breaking, it was the house itself. And then, amidst the chaos, she saw it, Elise's form, flickering in the reflection of the broken mirror. Her twisted, distorted figure was fading, her image slowly dissolving as the power of the house waned. The darkness around her receded, pulling back into the shattered mirror. Elise, Cora whispered, her heart aching. Her sister was slipping away, her form dissolving into the light, her eyes locking onto Cora's one last time. There was a moment of recognition, a flicker of the person she had once been, before she faded completely. The house groaned one final time, a low, mournful sound before the light erupted in a blinding flash. The last of the house's grip was shattered, and in that moment, the world went silent. Cora stood alone in the room, her body trembling, her chest heaving with exhaustion. The air around her was still now, the weight of the house's presence gone, replaced by a cold emptiness. The light from the shattered mirror had faded, and all that remained was dust, silence, and the remnants of the house that had once held them all captive. She had done it. She had broken the cycle. But at what cost? The air in the room was thick with the remnants of shattered light, the echoes of the destruction still reverberating in the walls. Cora stood motionless, surrounded by the debris of the mirror, the fragments of glass glittering on the floor like forgotten pieces of a broken dream. The house had stopped groaning, but the silence felt heavier than anything she had ever known. It pressed down on her, cold and suffocating, a silence that screamed of endings. Her hands were still trembling, the key still clutched tightly in her fist, the silver cool against her skin. She had done it. She had broken the mirror, shattered. The portal freed Elise. At least she hoped she had. But the question lingered, cold in the pit of her stomach. Had she really freed her sister, or had she only given the house another way to consume her? Cora took a step back, her feet crunching over the glass, and cast one last, lingering look at the wreckage of the mirror. Elise's image, twisted and broken, had vanished along with the last echo of the house's chime. The only thing left was the hollow emptiness of the room, the fading remnants of the house's influence. The air was no longer oppressive. It was still, almost unnatural. It was the calm that followed a storm, the unsettling quiet after the chaos. But then, as if summoned by her thoughts, a soft whisper, a barely audible murmur, came from somewhere beyond the room. Cora turned sharply, her heart skipping in her chest. "Elise!" she called out, her voice ragged, strained, desperate for any sign of her sister. The whisper continued, softer this time, but there was no reply. It wasn't Elise's voice, not the way it had been before. It was something else, something far older. Cora's heart sank, and she felt a creeping sensation of dread slide over her, curling in her stomach. The house hadn't been destroyed. It hadn't been shattered at all. It had only been temporarily silenced. Cora realized with a sickening clarity that what she had done hadn't broken the cycle. It had only cracked it open. The ritual, the curse that had bound her family to this place, to this thing, hadn't been undone. It had been unleashed. The house had been feeding off them, off their memories, their fears, their grief. It was an ancient thing, a creature of time and shadow, and its hunger hadn't been satisfied by her actions. No, it had only grown, and now it was turning on her. The ritual had to be completed, the final sacrifice made, or it would take everything. Again. The walls groaned again, but this time it wasn't a sound of a house in pain. It was a sound of something far more insidious. A low primal hum that vibrated through the air, like the slow awakening of something ancient and hungry. The house was alive, and it was waiting for its final piece. Her eyes darted to the altar, still standing at the center of the room, and something clicked in her mind. The altar wasn't just a relic. It was a part of the ritual. The symbols on the walls, the mirror, the broken shards. The house had been using them all to call something forth. Something that had been bound in the darkness beneath the estate for centuries. The figure of Elise, no, the thing that had once been Elise, had been the last piece. The last piece of a broken, twisted puzzle that was finally ready to be completed. The ritual. The pieces of the house's hunger had fallen into place. The house had fed on memories, on grief, on loss. But there was one final ingredient needed. One final offering. Cora's blood ran cold as the realization hit her. The house had been waiting for her, waiting for the moment when the mirror shattered, when the portal had been broken, when the last thread of her sister's soul had slipped free. She was the final piece of the puzzle. She had been chosen from the very beginning to be the key. A cold, cruel laugh bubbled up from the depths of her mind. No, not her laugh. A voice. The same voice she had heard whispering in the corners of her thoughts. The same voice that had called her to the house. It spoke from the darkness, its words a velvet caress. "You are mine now." The air grew colder still, the temperature dropping so suddenly that Cora's breath clouded before her. The shadows deepened, pressing in from all sides, their edges curling as if the house itself were alive, creeping toward her, closing in. The hum of the ritual was growing louder now, vibrating through her bones, filling her with a sensation of overwhelming dread. The walls bent toward her, warping, stretching, as if the very fabric of the house was reaching out, trying to claim her, to pull her into the depths of the portal, into its heart. Cora stumbled backward, her mind reeling, trying to make sense of what was happening. She was trapped. The house had won. It had been waiting for her all along, and now it would take everything, her memories, her soul, her life. And then she heard it. A cry. A scream. Her heart stopped. It was Elise. Cora's breath caught in her throat, her knees buckling as the realization slammed into her like a wave. Her sister was still here. Her sister wasn't gone. She had been trapped, corrupted, yes, but Elise had never truly left her. The creature in the hallway had been a reflection of the house's twisted influence, a reflection of the curse that had kept her tethered to this place. Elise had been a part of the house's ritual, but Elise was not the final sacrifice. Cora was. The shadows seemed to congeal around her, the air thickening, suffocating her as the walls closed in. She reached out, her hand grasping for something, anything, before she collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed by the weight of the house's hunger. The chime rang again, but this time it was a distorted scream, as though the house itself were crying out in ecstasy. "Elise!" Cora screamed, her voice breaking. "I won't leave you here!" Her words hung in the air for a moment, echoing in the empty, warping room before the darkness pressed in completely, smothering everything. The room, the house, was becoming one. The ritual was nearing its climax. She could feel it now, deep in her core. The cycle had begun again, and this time there would be no escape. In the distance, she heard Elise's voice one last time. It was faint but unmistakable. "Save me." Cora gasped as the floor cracked open beneath her, the stone altar shifting, transforming into something far darker. The house had made its choice, and now it was coming for her. Everything that had happened, all that she had discovered, the chime, the mirror, the house's hunger, had led to this moment. The ritual would end here. The house would claim her, just as it had claimed her sister. And when it did, it would be whole again. But as the darkness closed in around her, something deep within Cora stirred. A last shred of defiance, a will to fight. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe she could still destroy it all. The shadows twisted, and the hum of the ritual grew louder. She stood, shaking, heart racing. It wasn't over. Not yet. Not if she could make the final choice. The darkness wrapped around Cora like a suffocating blanket, pressing in from all sides. The walls of the house pulsing, shifting, breathing. The room was no longer just a room. It was part of something vast, something ancient. The hum of the house's ritual, its power, reverberated in her bones, filling her ears, drowning out everything else. The chime had stopped, but its echo, the distorted wail, still rang through her skull like an unholy dirge, urging her forward into the heart of the house. She could feel it, the pull. The house was alive, and it had chosen her. But the house had underestimated something. The last shred of will that remained in her. Cora's hand clenched around the locket, the cold metal digging into her palm. It had been the symbol of everything she had lost. Her sister, her family, her past. But now it was something more. It was a tether, a link to the life she had once known. The house had fed on memories, on loss, on grief. But there was one thing it couldn't consume. Hope. The words echoed in her mind, a final whisper of clarity amid the chaos. She wasn't just here to break the cycle. She was here to destroy it, once and for all. The shadows thickened around her, the room turning into a cavern of shifting dark shapes, the walls bending inward. She could feel the weight of it pressing down on her chest, but she stood her ground. The house wanted her to cower, to break, but she wouldn't. Not this time. The altar in front of her began to tremble, the symbols on the walls twisting like snakes, warping as if the house itself were being reborn. The ancient energy was building, coiling tighter and tighter. The portal, the mirror, had been destroyed, but the house still had power. It was feeding off the fear, off the desperate hope that had lingered in her heart, that she could save her sister, save herself. But it was too late for that. There was only one thing left to do. With a sharp breath, Cora pushed herself forward. She had seen the ritual's power before. It wasn't just a magic that fed on time. It was a magic that consumed souls. The house had been waiting for her to make this choice, to complete the cycle, to offer herself up as the final piece. But she had a choice. As she approached the altar, the shadows around her recoiled, as if the house had realized what she was about to do. The room grew colder, the temperature plummeting as though the very air had been drained of warmth. The house fought back. The shadows lashed out at her, tendrils of darkness wrapping around her limbs, pulling her toward the altar. But Cora resisted. She couldn't stop now. She wasn't going to be another offering to the house. "No," she whispered fiercely, her voice trembling with rage, with defiance. "I choose." And with that, she pulled herself free from the darkness, her hands reaching for the stone altar. As her fingers brushed the cold surface, the room shuddered violently, and for the briefest moment, she felt the house's grip tighten, felt its power try to swallow her whole. But then, something unexpected happened. The locket in her hand began to glow. At first it was faint, just a flicker, but then the glow intensified, bright enough to pierce the darkness. The metal, once cold and dull, now radiated a searing warmth. The house recoiled. The shadows shrank away, as though the light itself burned them. Cora gasped as the glow pulsed stronger, as though the locket had become the very heart of the house, a symbol of defiance against its ancient power. She felt it, an incredible surge of energy that pulsed from the locket into her body, filling her with an unshakable resolve. The house had fed on grief, on loss, on memory, but it hadn't understood the power of the human heart, the power of love. Love, Cora realized. It was what had kept her going all this time. Her love for Elise, for her family, for the memory of a life that was once whole. That love was stronger than any force the house could summon. The altar trembled. Again, but this time, it wasn't the house's power that caused the movement. It was Cora herself. She stepped forward, planting her feet firmly on the ground, as the light from the locket blazed around her, pushing back the shadows, unraveling the very fabric of the house. "You are the one who is bound," she said aloud, her voice steady with conviction. "Not me, not anymore." The darkness seemed to shriek in response, the sound twisting and warping into something that was not human. The house, in its desperate bid to claim her, pulled at her. But it couldn't reach her now. The light of the locket surrounded her like a shield, an impenetrable barrier against its corruption. And then, the final piece of the ritual began to unravel. The altar split in two, the stone cracking as if it were made of brittle glass. The symbols on the walls unraveled as well, their intricate designs tearing apart like paper in a storm. The air thickened and pulsed with energy as Cora felt the house's grip weaken, its hold on the world beginning to fray. The house, which had once been a prison, was now breaking apart at the seams. The walls groaned in agony, the air shrieking, as the power of the house was torn from its foundation. For the first time, Cora heard the sound of the chime fading, growing softer, weaker, as the house's power began to fade. The ritual, the cycle, the curse, it was all coming undone, and then the moment of truth arrived. She reached out, her hand trembling, and placed the locket on the altar. The moment it touched the stone, a burst of light filled the room, so bright, it blinded her. She felt it, the house, the power, the weight of everything pressing against her, but then it all vanished. The chime fell silent, the walls stopped shaking, and the air grew still. When the light faded, Cora opened her eyes. The house was gone. The shadows that had once filled the air had retreated, leaving behind a quiet emptiness. The altar was shattered, the symbols on the walls cracked and faded. The energy had dissipated, leaving the room calm, almost peaceful. But the peace felt wrong. It felt empty. Cora's knees gave way and she collapsed to the floor, her body exhausted, her mind overwhelmed. The house was silent now, its power gone, but there was no joy, no relief. There was only a cold, suffocating emptiness. "Elise," she whispered, her voice raw, her throat tight, but there was no answer. She had done it. She had destroyed the house. The cycle was broken. But in that silence, she knew that something was still missing. Elise was gone, and Cora, though free, was left with the weight of what had been lost. The ritual was over, but the price had been paid. The silence that followed the destruction of the altar was a strange thing. It was not the relief of an end, but the absence of something. The house was no longer alive in the way it had been, but its echoes, its presence, lingered in the very bones of the estate. The walls were still standing, the floor beneath her feet solid, but everything felt hollow, as if the structure itself was somehow waiting, lingering on the brink of something, waiting for her to realize the truth. Cora remained on her knees, her body aching from the strain of everything she had just endured. She wanted to stand, to feel the weight of her victory, but instead she felt drained, empty. Her hand still clutched the locket, now dark and cold. The warmth that had radiated from it had long since faded, leaving only the weight of what had happened behind. She had destroyed the heart of the house. She had severed its connection to the portal, the ritual, the endless cycle that had kept it alive for so long. She had broken the hold it had on her sister, on her family and herself. The house, its power, its influence was gone. But Elise, her sister, was still gone. Cora's throat tightened as she looked around the room. There were no shadows now, no presence that watched her every move. The house, for all its terrible power, was simply a shell, an empty, crumbling thing that had taken everything it could and in return had been torn apart. She had won. She had freed them both from its grip, but the victory felt empty. It felt hollow. And the cost of it was something she was only now starting to understand. She stood slowly, the weight of her body pressing her down, as if the very air in the room had turned against her. The destruction of the house had not restored the past. It had not brought back Elise. The echoes of the house, the distorted memories, were still with her. She could still hear the whispers, so faint now, but still present. Not a call to her, but a reminder of the price she had paid. The walls of the room groaned, but not from the house's energy. This sound was different. This was the sound of the house in its final moments, letting go. The last breath of something that had been long dead. She could feel the ground beneath her feet rumbling, the air thickening, like the house was shifting in its death throes. And yet, it wasn't the same. The power was gone. The ritual had been undone. But something lingered. Something was unfinished. The flicker of light in the broken mirror caught her eye, and she turned toward it, her body still heavy with exhaustion. The mirror was no longer just a portal. It was shattered, yes, but the edges of the glass still held a strange, unsettling energy. She approached it slowly, her reflection no longer clear in the cracked surface. She saw nothing now but broken fragments and the faint glow of something that wasn't quite light. Her fingers brushed against the edges of the mirror, and as she did, a sharp, fleeting vision filled her mind, a flash of her sister's face, distorted and broken. Elise, or what had once been Elise, standing in the shattered mirror, reaching out to her. But it wasn't the same face she had seen in the reflection before. It was different. There was something more, something darker. A shadow in her sister's eyes. A shadow that was not just part of the house, but part of the cost. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the vision vanished. Cora's hand jerked back from the mirror, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The air around her seemed to pulse, as if the house was breathing one last time, before collapsing into its final death. Suddenly, the ground beneath her shook and the room trembled violently. The walls cracked and groaned, and for a brief moment, Cora thought the house itself would fall apart, disintegrating into dust. But instead of collapsing inward, the ground began to split, opening up beneath her feet. The tremor intensified, and she staggered back, her feet slipping on the broken glass. She looked down, her heart pounding as the floor buckled, a deep crack splitting the foundation of the room. The darkness below was yawning wide, a gaping abyss that stretched down into nothingness. It was as if the house, in its final death, was trying to swallow her whole. The chime, now twisted and distorted, rang one last time in the distance, its hollow sound a wail of agony, of finality. Cora tried to move, to step away, but her legs wouldn't respond. She couldn't stop the pull, the force that was drawing her toward the chasm opening beneath her feet. The floor beneath her began to give way, the stone crumbling into the darkness below, as if the house had finally revealed its true nature. The portal was never truly destroyed. It had only been delayed. The house had fed on memories, on loss, on grief. But in its final breath, it was pulling Cora back to its heart, where it had always been waiting for its final sacrifice. But as the ground buckled beneath her, something else stirred within her, a realization. She wasn't going to be the sacrifice. She wasn't going to fall into the darkness again. She had already lost enough. She had already lost her sister, her family, her memories, but she wasn't going to lose herself. With every ounce of strength she had left, Cora staggered back, away from the chasm, away from the abyss that called her. She stumbled toward the door, her eyes fixed on the shattered remains of the altar, the broken pieces of the house that had once been the center of its dark power. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The house groaned one final time, the sound a death rattle, and as she reached the doorway, the walls trembled and cracked. The very foundation of the hollow estate began to collapse. Cora pushed the door, open with the last of her strength, stepping into the fading light of the outside world. As she crossed the threshold, the chasm behind her seemed to swallow the house whole. The ground beneath her feet shuddered, and the house, the hollow estate, finally collapsed into the abyss. The final breath of the house faded into the earth, its hunger silenced forever. She stood in the open air, the cool breeze brushing against her face. The sun, weak and dying, cast long shadows across the land, but the sky was clear. The estate was gone. The ritual had ended. The cycle was broken. But the cost. Cora felt the weight of it. Elise was gone. Her family was gone. Her past, her memories, they were all but fragments now, pieces of a puzzle that could never be whole again. The house had been destroyed, but its price had been steep. Cora was alone. But in that final moment of silence, there was a strange peace. A peace that felt like the last breath of something that had finally been freed. She turned her back to the ruins of the hollow estate and walked away. The house was gone, but its legacy would never be forgotten. The wind cut through Cora's hair as she stumbled away from the ruins of the hollow estate, the remnants of the once terrible house slowly fading into the distance behind her. The world outside was quiet, almost too quiet, as if the landscape itself was holding its breath, waiting for something that might never come. Cora's footsteps were slow, unsteady, and her heart still thundered in her chest. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt the air against her skin without the constant weight of the house bearing down on her. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was outside. She was free, but there was no joy in her escape. There was no triumph. The house was gone. The ritual had been broken. Elise was free from the house's grip, but in doing so, Cora had lost everything she had ever known, everything she had ever been. The world around her was unfamiliar now, vast and wide, but in its vastness, it felt empty. She felt the void of the house in the pit of her stomach, the absence of something that had been woven into the very fabric of her existence for so long. The sun, which had been faint in the sky, now hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly across the empty fields. There were no voices, no sounds, just the quiet rush of wind and the rustle of dead leaves beneath her feet. She could hear the echoes of the house in the back of her mind, the chime, the whispers, the shadows that had followed her every step. And though she had left the estate behind, its presence still clung to her, like an unwanted ghost. Cora paused at the edge of the estate, gazing back at the crumbling remains of the mansion. The walls were now reduced to rubble, the grand structure broken and scattered like a shattered dream. It was a silent graveyard now, the wind howling through the cracked remains like the mournful cries of the dead. The house had been a prison, yes, but it had also been a home, her home. And now, with its destruction, she was left with nothing. Her heart tightened as she thought of Elise, of the way her sister's face had twisted, how she had faded into the shadows, how she had been consumed by the very house that had once been their family's sanctuary. Elise was lost to the house, yes, but that loss ran deeper than just the physical. Elise had been a part of the house, woven into its very being. And in the end, that same twisted thread had bound Cora to it as well. Cora lifted her hand to her chest, feeling the cold locket there, the last piece of her family she had left. It was all that remained of them, the only connection she still had to the life she had once known. She had clung to the hope that breaking the cycle, breaking the house, would return Elise to her. But now she knew that hope was a lie. The house had taken too much, too many memories, too many lives. Elise was gone in every sense of the word, and no matter what she did, no matter how far she ran, she couldn't change that. A gust of wind stirred the hair around her face, and Cora looked up at the fading sun. She was alone now, completely alone, but she couldn't stop moving. She had no direction, no destination in mind, only the instinct to keep going. The emptiness in her chest pushed her forward, a dull ache that wouldn't leave. She had to escape it. She had to outrun the weight of the house, even if it meant running into the unknown. As she walked, the landscape around her began to change. The land stretched out in flat, barren plains, the earth dry and cracked from long years of neglect. The fields were empty, the only signs of life the occasional gust of wind that stirred the long grass and twisted plants. There were no birds, no animals, just the quiet. The house had been more than a physical prison. It had been a source of life, an anchor. Now that it was gone, Cora felt untethered, adrift in a world she no longer recognized. It was as though the house had been the last thing keeping her anchored to reality. And now that it had fallen away, she was left to float in an empty void, with nothing but her broken memories to keep her company. She had broken the cycle. She had freed herself, but freedom felt like a heavy burden, a weight that crushed her chest. There was nothing left to hold on to. No family, no home, no sister. The future stretched out before her, empty and cold, a vast unknown that she had no idea how to navigate. Cora's legs gave way beneath her, and she sank to her knees, gasping for air. The emptiness was too much. The loss was too great. The house had taken everything, and even in its destruction, it had left her with nothing. She had lost her sister. She had lost herself. The wind began to pick up, swirling around her like a vortex. She shivered against the cold, pulling her knees up to her chest. The locket in her hand felt heavy, too heavy, its cold surface a reminder of the life she could never return to. She closed her eyes, letting the wind carry the sounds of the past away. But still, she could hear the chime. Still, she could hear the whisper of the house calling her name. In that moment, she understood. The house wasn't just a place. It was a part of her. It had shaped her, molded her, and it had claimed her. She had fought to escape it, fought to destroy its hold on her, but in the end it had never truly left her. The house, with all its grief and loss, was inside of her. Now, she had become part of it. And no matter how far she walked, no matter how far she ran, it would never let her go. Cora stood up, the weight of her past heavy on her shoulders, and wiped the tears from her face. She wasn't free. Not really. The house would always be a part of her. But she had learned something in the end. She didn't have to fight it. She didn't have to run. She could carry the house within her and still move forward, one step at a time. And so she did. With the locket in her hand, the wind at her back, and the world before her, Cora took the first step away from the ruins of the hollow estate. She didn't know where she was going, but she was moving, and that was enough. The wind howled around Cora, a biting, unrelenting gust that tugged at her clothes and whipped her hair into her face. She didn't mind the cold. She didn't mind the wind. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was outside the suffocating walls of the hollow estate. The oppressive silence that had clung to the house now seemed distant, fading like a dream, swallowed by the vast expanse of the world beyond. She had walked for what felt like days, though the sun had barely moved in the sky. The land stretched out before her, empty, desolate, but oddly calming in its isolation. There were no trees, no buildings, only long, dry grass that swayed with the wind. The road ahead of her was worn, cracked with age, and faded as if it had been abandoned long ago. It felt as though she was walking along the edge of the world, where reality itself began to fray. Cora had no destination. She had no plan. She was simply walking, driven by an overwhelming urge to leave the past behind her, to escape the weight of what she had lost. The further she walked, the more distant the ruins of the hollow estate became. But no matter how far she moved, the house lingered in her mind, its presence still echoing in the space between her thoughts. She gripped the locket tightly in her hand, its cold metal digging into her palm. It was the only thing she had left, from her past, from them, her family, her sister, the memories they had all shared. It was all she had to remind her of the life that had once been. But with each passing step, she could feel those memories slipping further away from her, like grains of sand falling through her fingers. She couldn't hold on to them forever. The land around her felt like a mirror of her inner state, vast, empty, and without purpose. It was as if she had left everything behind, every anchor that had once held her in place. The hollow estate was gone. Elise was gone. Even the cycle that had kept the house alive, the one that had held Cora in its suffocating grip, had been broken. But she was still here, still standing, and still alive. The weight of survival pressed down on her, a burden she wasn't sure she was ready to carry. What now? The question rang through her mind again and again, each time more deafening than the last. She had freed herself, yes, but at what cost? She had destroyed the house, destroyed the cycle. But it had taken her sister. It had taken her family. She had nothing left, nothing to return to. The question of what came next seemed like a cruel joke, a puzzle with no answer. The world around her was empty, and yet, as she walked, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. There was something on the edge of her vision, something just out of reach, that tugged at the periphery of her senses. She couldn't explain it. It was like a whisper on the wind, a flicker of movement in the distance. It was a presence that seemed to follow her, to watch her every step. She paused for a moment, breathless, and turned around. The path behind her stretched out as far as the eye could see, the cracked, weathered road disappearing into the distance. No one was there. Nothing had followed her. It's just my mind, she thought. It's just the house, the memories. But even as she told herself this, a chill ran down her spine. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, that someone was close. It wasn't just the house haunting her, it was her own mind, her own memories, torturing her with the specter of what she had left behind. The echoes of her sister's voice, the weight of the house's power, the loss of everything she had ever known. They were all still with her. Cora gripped the locket tighter, its cold surface a reminder of everything she couldn't escape. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, forcing herself to calm. The world was silent now, just the wind and the occasional rustling of the grass beneath her feet. But the silence was too loud, too absolute, and it pressed against her ears, suffocating her in its weight. Elise, Cora whispered, the name escaping her lips without thought. She hadn't said it aloud in days, hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge the void that was left behind. But now, as the emptiness stretched out around her, as the silence engulfed her, she couldn't help it. Her voice broke the stillness, and for a moment it felt like the world itself had paused to listen. But nothing came. No reply, no answer. Just the wind, the empty landscape, and the haunting silence that had followed her ever since the house had fallen. Cora's heart twisted in her chest. The grief she had pushed away was coming back to the surface, raw and unrelenting. She wanted to scream, to rage at the emptiness, at the unfairness of it all. But she couldn't. The silence would only swallow her whole. She sank to her knees, in the grass, her body trembling from the weight of the emotions she had been holding back. The locket fell from her hand and landed softly on the ground beside her. She didn't reach for it. She didn't need to. It was all she had left, but it didn't bring her comfort anymore. It only reminded her of what she had lost. And then, in the stillness, something strange happened. A flicker of light. A small spark in the distance just beyond the edge of her vision. Cora blinked, disoriented, but when she looked again, it was gone. She stood up, wiping the tears from her eyes, and glanced around, trying to make sense of it. Nothing. It must have been a trick of the light, the wind playing tricks with her mind. But then, it came again, a faint light, this time closer. It was soft and flickering, like the glow of a candle, just out of reach. Cora hesitated, uncertainty gnawing at her, but something inside her urged her forward. The presence, the whisper, was there again, tugging at the edges of her mind. It was as if the very air around her was alive, guiding her, calling her toward something. With her heart racing, she took a tentative step forward, moving toward the light. The landscape around her began to shift, subtly at first, and then more, sharply. The dry earth seemed to soften beneath her feet. The wind, once harsh and bitter, began to change direction, moving in rhythm with the flickering glow. The light was real. She wasn't imagining it. Cora walked toward it, the wind urging her on. It was pulling her closer, and she felt the weight of it, the sense that this light was something important, something that might give her a sense of direction. She could feel it in her chest, the way it warmed her, the way it made her feel less alone. And just as she approached the source of the light, she stepped forward into a small grove of trees that she had not noticed before. In the center was an old stone well, covered in ivy and moss, the glow emanating from it. It was faint but undeniable. The light was coming from within the well. Cora stepped closer, her hand trembling as she reached for the stone edge. The well felt ancient, as though it had been forgotten by time itself. She didn't know why, but the presence of the well, the light, felt like a sign. It was not just a flicker. It was something deeper. As her fingers brushed the stones of the well, the light grew brighter. The shadows of the past, the house, the memories, faded slightly, replaced by something new, something that felt like hope. Her eyes widened as the well began to hum, the light flickering like a flame caught in the wind. The hum grew louder, resonating through the air, until the sound was a pulse, a heartbeat. Something ancient was stirring, something connected to the very land she stood on, and in that moment Cora realized something. The house might be gone, but its legacy was still here, in her. The past was part of her, yes, but it didn't have to define her. The well's glow pulsed brighter, and for the first time, Cora felt the stirring of something new, something she had never expected. Maybe this was where she was meant to go after all, the first step into something more. The light from the well seemed to pulse with an ancient energy, vibrant and steady, as though it were breathing in sync with Cora's own heartbeat. She stood on the edge, her fingers grazing the cold stone, her mind racing to make sense of what was happening. The world around her had shifted in an instant, the dry, barren landscape fading behind her like a forgotten dream. The air felt charged, filled with the promise of something new, something different. And yet, as much as the light called to her, something deep within her still resisted. What is this? Her thoughts spiraled, trying to piece together the strange events that had led her here. The broken house, the shattered mirror, the twisted remnants of her sister. The weight of her past was still heavy on her shoulders, and even with the light before her, she wasn't sure how much she was ready to let go. She had destroyed the hollow estate, but its shadow was still cast over her, lingering in every step she took. The house had been a prison, yes, but it had also been a part of her history. The memories were still alive in her, bound to the place and to the life she had known before. The light flickered again, casting long shadows across the ground as Cora hesitated. She could feel the pull of it, an invitation to something beyond, but the uncertainty gripped her. Was this a new beginning? Or was it another trap, a way for the house to keep its hold on her? A soft, unfamiliar whisper brushed against the edge of her thoughts, something so faint that she could barely catch it. But it was there, a fleeting sound like the rustle of leaves, a murmur in the wind. Without thinking, Cora leaned closer to the well, her gaze fixed on the soft glow emanating from within. The air around it shimmered, and as her eyes adjusted to the light, she saw that it wasn't just the stone of the well she was gazing at. The surface of the water at the bottom, though still and dark, reflected the glow in a way that felt wrong. The reflection seemed distorted, as if it were pulling at the light itself, warping it. Cora's breath caught in her throat. She could see something beneath the surface, something shifting just out of sight. It wasn't a shadow. No, it was something more, something alive. Her hand instinctively moved toward the edge of the well, and the moment her fingers brushed against the stone, a strange energy surged through her. A rush of images, fleeting and fragmented, filled her mind. Memories, faces, voices. She saw Elise, her sister, standing in a dark hallway, calling her name with that familiar childish voice. Then the image shifted, and she was standing in the middle of the library, watching the mirror shatter, the glass falling to the ground like 1,000 tiny stars. She saw the moment her mother had broken, lost in the depths of the house's influence. She saw herself running, fighting, trying to hold on to something, anything that could pull her free of the house's grip. But there was more. Beyond the images of her family, beyond the memories she had known, something else surfaced. Something ancient, forgotten. A voice, low and guttural, filled her mind with a single word: leave. The word echoed through her thoughts, not spoken aloud, but felt deep within her soul. She recoiled, stumbling back from the well, her chest heaving with the weight of the vision. The water in the well remained still, but the air around it was alive, humming with energy, as if the well itself was waiting for her to make a choice. Cora's heart raced. The voice in her mind was not the house's. It was something older, something more primal. She had felt it before, the presence that had lingered in the background, feeding on her fear, on her grief. The house had been only a vessel for something more ancient, a force that had used her and her family as pawns in its twisted game. The light from the well flickered again, and Cora realized with a jolt that it wasn't merely a reflection of the past. It was reflecting the future. This was the moment of truth. The house had been destroyed, but whatever had bound her to it still remained. The portal wasn't just a gateway to the past. It was a threshold, a doorway to something far beyond her understanding. Her hand shook as she stepped back from the well, her mind swirling with the weight of the choices before her. She could turn and walk away. She could leave this place behind and let the past remain buried, just as the house had crumbled into ruin. But a part of her knew deep in her gut, that the house had only been the beginning. The darkness was still out there. The ancient force that had fed on her family, on her sister, was waiting. And if she walked away, she would leave the side door open for it to return. But if she stayed, if she let the light guide her, what would happen? Was she truly ready to face what lay beyond the well? Was there a way to destroy the darkness once and for all? The questions churned in her mind like a storm, but there was one truth she couldn't ignore. The journey she had begun in the hollow estate was not yet over. The house might be gone, but the echoes of it still remained, buried deep in the earth, in the world, and in herself. She wasn't finished, not yet. Cora closed her eyes, breathing in the air, letting the wind carry the weight of her decision. She had been running for so long, trying to escape the darkness, trying to outrun the past. But the past was part of her. It always would be. The question now was how to face it, how to move forward with the fragments of herself that remained. When she opened her eyes again, the light from the well shimmered brighter than before, as if it were responding to her thoughts, to her resolve. The surface of the water rippled, the distorted reflection fading, replaced by something new, something clearer, a glimpse of what could be. The possibilities. Cora stepped forward again, her heart pounding, and looked into the well. In its depths, she saw the reflection of herself, whole, undistorted, standing in the light. And for the first time in a long while, she felt something stir inside her. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was something stronger than fear. Something that urged her to move forward, to face whatever awaited on the other side. The darkness is not gone, she realized, but it doesn't own me. Not anymore. With a final steady breath, Cora reached for the well, the light surrounding her. Intensified, the warmth of it filling her body as she stepped closer, her hand hovering just above the surface of the water. She didn't know what would happen when she touched it, but she was ready to find out. Cora's hand trembled as it hovered over the surface of the well's dark water, the faint light radiating from below, pulsating gently in time with her heartbeat. She could feel the heat from the light now, a warmth that seemed to spread outward, curling around her fingers like a promise. The light beckoned her, calling to something deep inside her, something buried beneath the layers of grief, fear, and pain that had once defined her existence. But there was still hesitation, a lingering doubt that crawled under her skin, whispering that this was a step too far. The well was no longer just a place, no longer just a relic from the house. It was a doorway, a threshold to something more. What waited on the other side? Could she truly walk into the unknown? Could she leave behind the remnants of the past? The memories that still clung to her like the shadows of the house itself? Cora closed her eyes for a moment, shutting out the bright pulse of the light. Her breath came in shallow bursts, and she clenched her fists, feeling the cool metal of the locket dig into her palm. It had been her anchor, the last tangible connection to everything she had lost. Elise, her family, her memories, they were all tied to that small piece of metal. And yet, as she stood before the well, with the light pulling her toward the unknown, she understood something. She understood that she couldn't keep living in the past. The house, the cycle, it had already consumed too much of her. It was time to move forward, to choose what came next. Her heart thundered in her chest as she reached for the water's surface. Her fingers brushed the cold, rippling surface, and the instant she made contact, a shock of energy shot up her arm, crackling through her body. She gasped, her body locking up as the light around her flared, growing blindingly bright. The world seemed to spin, the ground beneath her feet shifting, tilting. For a moment she feared she might fall, swallowed up by the intensity of the power swirling around her. But then everything stilled. The brightness softened, and when Cora opened her eyes, she found herself standing in a vast, unfamiliar place. The light that had once emanated from the well now seemed to be all around her, stretching outward in every direction. It was a soft, ethereal glow, warm and inviting, like the first rays of dawn breaking through a dark night. The air was different here, clearer, purer, almost weightless. But the world itself felt fragile, suspended between realities. She took a step forward, her feet sinking into the soft, velvety ground, which seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The landscape around her was unlike anything she had ever seen. There were no trees, no buildings, only vast fields of tall, golden grass that stretched endlessly beneath a sky that shimmered with shades of twilight. The horizon was blurred, as if the very edge of the world were dissolving into light. Time didn't seem to exist here. The air was filled with a quiet hum, a gentle vibration that resonated deep within her chest. Cora moved forward cautiously, her breath shallow as she scanned the world around her. There was no sign of life, no indication of what had brought her here. But the sense of presence was undeniable. She wasn't alone in this place. She could feel it, the weight of something watching, something waiting. Suddenly, a movement caught her eye. At first it was faint, just a flicker in the distance, like the faintest shadow moving between the fields. But as she focused, she saw it clearly. A figure, tall and indistinct, standing at the edge of the horizon, silhouetted against the soft, glowing sky. It was motionless, but something about it felt alive, as if it were waiting for her, just as she had been waiting for something. Cora's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure why, but she felt an inexplicable pull toward the figure, a magnetic force drawing her closer. She didn't understand why, but the figure felt important, like it held the answers to questions she hadn't even known to ask. It was as though this place, this world, was a bridge between what had been and what was yet to come. Without thinking, she began to walk toward the figure, her steps slow and deliberate, each footfall a quiet echo in the vast emptiness. The world around her seemed to shift as she moved, the light shifting and flowing, surrounding her like a living thing. She could feel her thoughts becoming clearer, her senses sharpening. This was no ordinary place. This was not the world she had known. It was something else, something more. As she neared the figure, the air around her began to hum louder, the pulse of the landscape growing more intense. The figure remained motionless, but Cora felt the weight of its presence, like it was both part of her and entirely separate. There was a connection between them, a bond that had existed long before this moment, long before the house, long before the rituals and the loss. She stopped a few paces away from the figure, her breath catching in her throat as she finally saw it more clearly. It wasn't human, it wasn't even an entity she recognized. It was a being of pure light and shadow, its form shifting and flickering, as though it were both solid and intangible at the same time. The colors around it shifted like the sky at dusk, shades of violet, gold and blue that rippled across its surface like liquid. And then it spoke. Its voice was not spoken aloud, but felt deep inside her, as though it had always been part of her thoughts. "You've come far, child of the house." The words echoed in her mind, reverberating through her very soul. Cora took a hesitant step forward, her heart racing. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice a mere tremor in the silence. "What is this place?" The figure did not move, but the hum around her deepened, and the light surrounding it seemed to pulse. "This is the space between worlds," the figure replied, its voice softer now, like a breath on the wind. "The space where choices are made, where futures are forged and pasts are reconciled. You stand at the threshold of what is and what could be." Cora's mind spun, trying to make sense of the words, trying to piece together what she was being told. Was this a dream? A vision? Or something else entirely? "Am I dead?" she asked, the words slipping from her lips before she could stop them. The figure was silent for a moment, its shifting form pulsing softly with light. And then, as if the answer were self-evident, it spoke again. "No, you are not dead, but you are no longer bound by the world you knew. You have broken the cycle. You have chosen to step beyond it. This is the moment where you must decide what comes next." The weight of its words hung in the air between them. Cora felt the enormity of the choice that loomed before her, the responsibility of the journey she had taken. The house, the ritual, the destruction, it had all led her here, to this moment, to this figure, to this space between the worlds. "You said I've broken the cycle," Cora whispered. "But what happens now? What happens to me?" The figure's light flickered gently, almost as if it were sighing, and then it spoke once more. "You have two paths before you. One will lead you back to the world you knew, a world where the past is forgotten, the house is nothing but dust, and the grief that has defined you is gone. You will leave this place and become a part of the world once more." Cora's heart clenched at the thought. To return, to forget, to walk away from everything she had lost, everything she had suffered. But what would that mean for her? Would it erase everything? The pain, The memories, the light. The second path. The figure continued. Will require you to leave the world you know behind, but it will not free you of your past. You will carry the weight of it with you, but you will also carry the knowledge that you have overcome it. You will be the keeper of the house's legacy, but you will never again be enslaved by it. You will walk forward, carrying the lessons of your journey with you, forging your own future. Cora's mind swirled with the possibilities. Could she really walk away from everything? Was it worth leaving behind the knowledge of what had happened? Could she face the world again, knowing the house's shadow would never truly leave her? And yet, the second path, it was calling to her. The weight of the house was no longer a curse, but a responsibility. She had chosen to break the cycle, but now the true choice was whether to forget the past or let it guide her into a future she could control. For the first time in what felt like years, Cora felt the stirring of something within her, a strength, a resolve. The past would never leave her, but maybe, just maybe, that was the key to her future. She took a deep breath. I choose the second path, she said, her voice steady, clear. I will carry the weight of the house with me, but I will choose what it means. I will choose my future. The figure's form seemed to pulse with approval, and the light around them brightened, blinding Cora for a moment before it faded to a soft glow. Then go, child of the house. Go and forge your own path. You are free now, truly free. The world awaits you. And with that, the light faded from the figure, and the landscape around her began to shift once more, the air clearing, the darkness retreating. Cora turned, stepping toward her future, the path ahead uncertain, but entirely her own. Cora's heart raced as she took her first steps into the unknown, leaving behind the ethereal landscape of the well and the figure that had guided her to this pivotal moment. Her breath came steadily, the weight of her decision still lingering heavily in her chest. She had chosen the second path, the path that would carry her past the broken house, past the years of suffering and loss, into a future that was hers to shape. But as she walked, she could feel the weight of her past behind her, clinging to her like a shadow. The house was gone, its power broken, its cycle ended. And yet the echoes of it, of her sister, of her family, of everything she had lost, still haunted her thoughts. The world around her began to shift once more, the light of the space between worlds fading as the air turned cooler, more familiar. Cora felt the ground beneath her feet solidifying, the soft, velvety soil of the other world giving way to something more tangible, something that felt like reality. She wasn't sure what would happen when she crossed the threshold, but she knew one thing for certain. The past would never let her go entirely. She couldn't forget it. She couldn't erase it. The house, the memories, Elise, they were all part of her now. But she was no longer running from them. She wasn't going to let them define her. Ahead of her, the path stretched out, lined with trees and distant hills. It looked like a place from her past, a place she might have seen in dreams or fleeting memories. A world that was familiar but just out of reach. The breeze that brushed against her skin felt real now, the air clean and full of life. The light shifted with each step, the dim glow of the world beyond slowly dissolving as daylight returned, casting long shadows across the landscape. She moved forward, unsure of where she was going, but knowing she had to keep moving. With each step, she could feel herself shedding the weight of the house, the heavy burden of grief and fear that had been stitched into her soul. She had carried it for so long, and now, with each step, it lightened. But that wasn't to say the past didn't still have its grip on her. The memories of her family, of Elise, flooded her thoughts unbidden. They were never truly gone. She paused as the path opened up to a clearing. The trees around her gave way to a wide expanse of open land, the sun low on the horizon casting golden light over the fields. It was quiet here, peaceful even. But Cora couldn't ignore the pull in her chest, the sense that something was missing. The memories of Elise, of the house, were still here, nestled in her heart, in her mind. She could feel them. Every laugh, every tear, every whisper of the house's chime. For a long moment, Cora stood in the clearing, the light dancing in her hair, the breeze playing around her face. She closed her eyes, breathing in deeply. The sound of the wind was all around her now, sweeping across the land as if urging her to let go of the past. But the past wasn't something that could be so easily left behind. And then, as if by instinct, she reached into her pocket, pulling out the locket. She hadn't even realized she was still holding it. Her fingers traced the edges of it, and the familiar weight in her palm felt like a link to her past, to the pieces of her life that could never be erased. It was the only thing she had left of them, of the family she had lost. She held it in her hand for a moment, feeling the cool metal, the smooth surface. She could feel Elise again. It wasn't just the memory of her, it was her. Her sister's presence was still alive in the locket, in the very act of holding it. But Elise was gone, trapped in the house, consumed by it. That was the truth, and Cora had to face it. The locket, the memories, everything. It would never be enough to bring Elise back. But that didn't mean she couldn't carry the memories with her. It didn't mean she couldn't carry Elise's light with her as she moved forward. She had been strong, even when the house had twisted them both into something they hadn't been. Elise had always been the brave one. And now, it was Cora's turn to be brave too. With a steady breath, Cora unclasped the locket, opening it one final time. She stared at the photo inside, the one of her family, smiling, whole, before the house had taken everything from them. Her mother's bright eyes, her father's stern yet loving gaze, and Elise smiling with that wide, innocent grin. They were gone, but they would always be a part of her. She looked up, her eyes fixed on the horizon, where the land met the sky. The sun was almost gone now, casting a soft glow across the earth. It was quiet, peaceful, and yet the weight of the locket, the memories still pressed against her chest. But she couldn't let them rule her anymore, not like they had before. She had to choose. With a final exhale, Cora closed the locket and tucked it back into her pocket. She felt the faintest pang of loss, but it was quickly replaced with something else. The path ahead of her was open, wide, full of possibilities, and as much as the past had shaped her, it didn't define her. It couldn't. She stepped forward, moving away from the clearing and onto the path once more. The sun had almost set, and the first stars began to appear in the sky. She didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid. She didn't need to be. The house was gone. Elise was gone. Her family was gone. And Cora was alone. But she was no longer trapped in the past. She was free, and she would find her way forward, step by step. The world around Cora had shifted completely now, the sun low in the sky casting long shadows over the land. She continued walking, her feet carrying her along the path, but her mind was no longer caught in the same cycle of grief and fear. The full wind whispered through the tall grass, gentle and constant, a reminder that she was still part of something bigger, something that existed outside of the house, outside of the past. The land was vast, stretching out beyond her sight, but it no longer felt empty. It felt full of possibility, a new world waiting for her to shape it. It had been so long since she had seen the world like this, so long since she had felt alive outside of the house's shadow. And yet, as she walked, a part of her still ached. Elise was gone, her family was gone, The house, its curse, its hunger, it was all broken, undone, but the weight of the memories remained. The house had taken so much from her, and it had left its mark. No matter how much she tried to move forward, there would always be something of the house within her. The grief would always be there, somewhere in the background, haunting the edges of her thoughts. But that was okay. She had learned that she could carry it and still walk forward. She didn't have to escape the past to live a full life. She didn't have to forget everything that had come before. She just had to learn to live with it, to let it shape her without letting it control her. As she walked, the landscape changed before her eyes. The dry, empty plains that had stretched out endlessly gave way to a rolling meadow, green and lush, the earth beneath her feet soft and rich. The distant hills rose gently against the horizon, and in the distance she could make out the faint outline of a river, glimmering in the fading light. The world had begun to come alive around her in ways that made her feel more connected to it than she ever had before. She paused at the edge of the meadow, her breath steadying as she looked out at the scene before her. The air was thick with the scent of grass and earth, and the wind had picked up, tugging at her hair, at her clothes. It felt like a new beginning. She could see it now. This place, this world, was not just a continuation of the past. It was a place she could carve out for herself, a place where she could make new memories, where the weight of the house would no longer define her. She could feel the pull of the river in the distance, the desire to go there, to sit by its edge and listen to the water. It would be a place to find peace, to finally let go of the last remnants of the grief that had bound her for so long. But just as she took a step toward it, something stopped her. A voice, faint but unmistakable, whispered in her mind. Elise. Her heart skipped a beat, and she froze. The voice was soft, but it was there, unmistakable. She could almost hear her sister's laughter echoing in the distance, blending with the wind. Elise's presence had never truly left her, even after everything. The house had taken her, yes, but it had never completely consumed her. Her sister's light, her spirit, still lingered in the world around her. Cora closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. She could feel the tears rising, but this time they weren't tears of loss, they were tears of release. She had carried the weight of everything, the grief, the memories, the guilt, for so long. But now she could feel a shift, a change. She could feel Elise with her, not as a ghost, not as something lost to the house, but as a part of the world she was stepping into now. Elise's light was still a part of her, and that light would guide her forward. Cora opened her eyes again, her gaze falling on the river in the distance. The sound of the water, soft and constant, called to her. She stepped forward, her feet moving steadily toward it. She was ready now, ready to face what was ahead. The path to the river was winding, and with every step, she felt herself shedding the last of the house's grip. The light of the setting sun bathed the land in a warm glow, and as she walked, she could feel the weight in her chest begin to lift. She had chosen the second path. She had chosen to carry the past with her, but not to be defined by it. The river was closer now, the sound of the water louder, soothing. She reached the bank and knelt down, touching the cool water with her fingertips. The river's flow was steady, constant, as if it had always been there, just as the memories of her family would always be a part of her. But the water didn't stand still. It moved. It didn't linger in the past. It kept going, just as she was going to keep going. The light of the fading sun caught the surface of the water, shimmering like 1,000 tiny stars. Cora looked at her reflection in the water, and for the first time, she didn't see the broken girl who had left the hollow estate behind. She saw someone else, someone who had been through darkness, through pain, but had survived it. Someone who had the strength to move forward, to choose her own path. The memories of her family, of Elise, of the house, they would always be with her. But they were no longer chains. They were threads in the fabric of her life, part of her story, but not the whole of it. She could carry them, honor them, but she didn't have to let them control her. She didn't have to live in the shadows of the past. With one last, lingering look at the water, Cora stood up, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. She turned away from the river and looked out at the horizon, where the stars were beginning to appear one by one against the darkening sky. The path before her was long and uncertain, but it was hers to walk. The past was gone. The house was gone. Elise was gone. But Cora was still here, and she was ready for whatever came next. With her heart lighter than it had been in years, she stepped forward into the night, the stars above her guiding her way. The future was waiting, and this time she was ready to face it.